가게 도전에서는 다와도 제 방에 담배 쳤는 데서 고담달라 창살로 야야다 다시나 가서 치료 언제 줬어? 치료 가
go yesterday the review session.
가 이거 주세요. 아야 다잖아 가져와. 산지 좀 된데 내가 애는 고불로 주기 오마자시르 주대 애는 담배 거진 참여권에 다 되잖아요. 지지 아니 관계 투지녀서는 다와도 제방에서 담배 취는 된제가 고담달라 차차로 세송하래 아니 더버 좀 된데 아니 투지심을 상황도 관계 투지녀서는 다 투지심을 아니 야 가서 투지심을 상황도 교도 돼요 아니 배드 용자리야 아니 장미 숨기 ring리야 아니 다베신집에 창주고 숨기 아니 군엘란데 아니 장미 숨기 초사네 대한 아니 장미 당불고로 나 초조게 내가 장미 당불 초사 아니 마다스도 내가 장미 입에 초사 다고 썼음기 내가 장미 숨에 초사네 도스네 아니 장미 숨기 초 산에다 된데들 단다 탑도 싫어고 다 남려야 왜다 한 벤닝도 필도 심바 된제지기 다네 에나 타르다 뭐서 산지바 임바리 전에는 산제내자 아니 강기체도 아니 산지지 고마 뭔도 자샤베 두저심쟁이다 자야지마도 신 시워 초지고라 슈슈하 자원이는 멤버리 그래서 성숨 로지베 틀레베밀도 주야게 미유코라 셴던도 공네 다 디트버리 디리베 인도자네 투지심이 상황도 교배고네 상도 따와다제 방배치스 다 뒤절이야 아니 더 컨디스 자워스라나 아니 아니 가서 그게 춘주나바 숨세네 아니 토군제의 춘주 송제된지 춘주 고수주의 춘주 세네 춘주 숨시게야래 딱 부이 주주로서 같은 저기 다네 샹데 차세 샹든제 양도 가버리 그 차세 찬세다 레마도 남진 사람 거야 돼 고수주의 춘주 거는 용도야 야마래 다 토군제의 춘주기 투기배 친로를 지금 나네 요야 말이 그래서 좀 전에 전이 그것도 제가 고반데 톱 컨디지기다 톱고 그랬었나 아니 좀 전에 코란게 장미순지 정리하다 초사 집어장네 가다 탑시기다 라르르는 거 봐서 산지에 인도산에 어다 코란게 냠용부터 하네 아니 마 뒤절마 송 제대지 촌주 송셔다 디기도 하네 아니 가서 남지가 살이야 집은 자야게 톱은 디 코나마다 셰메버리 봐 자, 들이 인도산에 다 관계 투수인 손에 따와 통제 방법에 담배전에 던져봐서 에너다 따와 통제 방법에서 소야디 나랑즈 체기 동의야 뒤에 친절하게 떡에 개용이야리 뉴에 동에다 에너 터도 에너 캐번도 지기 동에서야디 녀링 가다데 녀링이 다 풍부 간다 레뉴지 팡배 아니 녀링이 풍부인데 다 두지기 동에서 송겨야리 뒤 동에 담식 땡지기도 다티 아니 가서 우리 봐 텔레 타고 거래 텔레 타야 생이디 티 두지기 주 델레 듀디 세야관에 아니 내리기 풍부 쿠르디 차와지 지규레마도 텔레 나서 답시 야말바 tumnom되고 주의면 주신자 멋있게 가서 소리 제니 또 롱고트셔 어디 지지 가버지 지수 가버지 어디 지수 저 도스니 저들이 인도자네 다 두지기 동네가 자와디 다 녀몽 지기가 인도자네 녀몽이야 아니 때민지 녀몽다 싫어 녀몽전스 니도 용도가 때민지 녀몽디 되게 자도스디 싫어 녀몽전스 하게 다 직더다 다 뜻을 토용이야 자상가다디 타르도나 아니 라다 녀몽 사베다 라다 녀몽 남도라 다들 저번에 동원이 가고 소원은 신체내다 간다 댄징 그때 아니 지기와 인도자네 다 어딘들 싫은 녀몽제 세야디 아니 친지모 싫은 녀몽제 세야디 유기 내로도 친지로도 더 별로 심해 인도자네 디세야기 탑시디 유기 내로 친지 말라고 때네 대시 대퇴삼 대퇴는 kum지되네 도선 다 친지로게 다한테 시주점마도 셴 차범제 차 사야제 시대위네 대장을 세대야 가고 싶어. 다 시루디 기야가 된다라. 아니 소사 집중해야 차사 되저지 빙해봐도 그게다 편도여도 그러지. 개침을 제마도 시루니 뭐저고 세야 돼. 닝지검네 팽그 말이 창주고선 검네 팽그 말이 진부 수준 써봐 되저지 팽겨다. 처럼 내신 거 써봤다 지금 팽겨는 맞다. 딱 간다. 근데 인도 돈이도 싫어 냐지기. 다 지질로가 다 또바게야 그 싸 댄지 머리 봐서야 되다 미국 찍으면 진짜 무슨 개관에 다 달려야 내용 샤도가 그래서 이들 전에 좀 된데기 다 두절을 제거네 동의기 싸 친실로가다 따와 대남 지질로가 따와지다 하고다 디무 댄지 점배체도 아니 최소화리스 그래서 이들 전에 좀 된데기다 최소야기 미유 소르디 두지기 묘모 싸워 띠무 댄지스야 세가 단다로 숨어 있는 자네 다 가다 에네 동니가 다와디 개좀 쉬어셔도 진짜 있는 거서 시진근 돌이야 뭐든 동니스네 슝근권에 슈고도 명점 다서 매매서 송가 대토기야 봐 어쨌든 있는 자네 에네 가장 뒤순한테다 다워터지 방배치 담배치는 담을 잡아스 어디 대대베다 담바 서든지 인도 안돼야 가장 능력도 소중 더 하는 날에 여반데 가서 님에서 다게 빼먹한지다 순거에서 다게 지된 상황제 담바 샤자토버 점이 두지제 냥한다 더 거인다라 차차로스 스지디 슝가르 쓰그래 소중도 슝먹는 수对手真是下第几位是的可能有新的呗现在还有你没信同样嘛说的人影响去可能对人说说个东西哪里听过你哪是说说说你就听过的可能有信过嘛的到那时嘛就罗的那是他就是就是这人的兄弟被说什么多啊你们是那个表面看起来那些送给吃来的送给外省的人家你们不少这个样子真正印度嘛他们是送下的带头多아니 뭐 저 나라로 다른 남샤도 만자리 제디네 뭐 담배 연대 소유도 강시 끌으면 뭐 단주시 과한 담을 더 장서 단시 담바 사다 되더라 인루 타녀배 차내네 단시 담바 하고 단담부 차내 단시 담바 인도잖아요 어다이니 단시 담바 달라 차차네 전에 송샤 진짜 임버리 당아주 디디 아니 지르다 나고 산제베 최디 점물이 디강기 출루 개체지 차디하리 출루 체 자식이 다 상제비 최디 에시에 출루리 다 아니 잖아 참배 잖아리 다가는 시기에 가슬라다리 지 기란전들이 코리아다 일본다 에네 베트남다 다 바르마다 스리랑카다 타일랜드 캄보디아다 라오스 에네 페도 소고 진디디 다 남배 유루와 말한서 파미기 다 줄로 차대요리 저는 누저 제거서 나도와야 능기 지다 낭션 제셔도 제베 그돌이야 데 누저 유루서 소소 파미네 아니 주다 다가도 주도 크리스천 다 주도 크리스천 다 되게 간다 주주디 차대요리 아니 같이 주주요리 배터리 인도자네 소소 판매기 주유 다가라 아니 스나 야그레스 주로 주야서는 라라야 말이스 내가 강사 치다고 리소 내서 가가래 소소 감다 매버도 되네 내서 가가라 그러면 진짜 진짜 셔대 어때는 신 추조대 판매는 남아 있는 저에도 소소한 판매기 주주 걸어라 제시하다 아니 단답하게 가다 약 최버죠 가려서는 소스 미리 가봐야 있는 소소소 리슝주아리 갈자 콤시지 갈자 콤시디 나라라 소소스 판매기다 로똥다 그런 게 줄루디 저샤도가 그러나 웨스턴 갈자스 레베이나 누주베 주도 크리스천 저와데 숙성부야리 대신도 아니 데 에시아 나는 샤샤나 그 차이니스 갈자 아니 부디즘 샤 숙성부 저와 숙성부야리 아니 코리안 culture, Japanese culture, Vietnamese culture, 소소소 culture 나눠야 소소 판매기 최된 저 숙성부터 와. 그래서 그들이 그들 잡아야 해. 자다 들리는데 내가 남주 지 노조농배 나눠야 지금 낭주 리셔리 제베 그돌라 내가 nen데지라고요. 다들 최규리하게 말다스. 맨 낭주 나네 지금 지난주 지금 냠린 투모 입었는데 향도 레는 디그레스 딜라야 용그레스 지기지기 로션샤 때데 용그레스 레마도 신쇼 소스 파밍 쳐잖아 야그레스 두세티기 자다 들데 다 소스 파밍이 내 낭배 쳐인도잖아 바 낭전 드셔야돼 그때 가서래 맞아 영향 좀적하게 믿어가 세상 깨리다 아니 장소 거리에 된게 베트남인들이 장소다 낭션 드셔야지 근데 걸로 대부치는 드셔야 여대지 용대도 드르랭그리 사바지 계란조라 파면에 여대be 최대 땅에 샴디 쪽이야래 사들이인데 말해보게 롯데버시다 아니 이스물 정도 와야 잠주
차공양대 올려주십시오.
언제나
So blessing for the tea first.
존기덕갱전결원공 방심니가 담덩이종 정사양약 위료형고 위성도 응수 자식
So in remembering the kindness of the teacher, Buddha Shakyamuni, Nagarjuna, at the end of his Mulamadhyamaka Karika, the fundamental verses of the middle way, says, moved by your compassion, you taught the holy Dharma to rid us all of distorted views, and therefore I pay homage to you, the Gautama. And so what this verse shows is that Buddha was moved by his compassion, first of all, to engage in the practices of bodhisattvas over 3 countless eons, and to accumulate what is known as the merit and wisdom, to create the conditions for for to become a fully enlightened one. And therefore, of these first 3 countless eons, he spent the first countless eon during the path of the accumulation, Bodhisattva path of accumulation and the path of the preparation. And then the second countless eon was spent during the first 7 Bodhisattva grounds, or the first, what are known as the 7 impure Bodhisattva grounds. And then the third countless eon was spent during the last 3 grounds of the Bodhisattvas, or the 8th, 9th, and 10th grounds. And so in this way, the Buddha created all these enormous called the wisdom and method within himself to become enlightened, with incredible, extraordinary determination to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings, and finally became a Buddha, an enlightened one. And so the purpose of becoming enlightened one, right from the beginning, was to serve other sentient beings. Right from the beginning, when he generated great compassion and so forth, before entering the path of accumulation and so forth, he actually was determined to work for sentient beings, to serve other sentient beings, and therefore, having become enlightened, he had reached this goal of being able to serve sentient beings without any kind of hindrances, or unobstructed, and effortlessly being able to help other sentient beings. And so how do the Buddhas serve other sentient beings? Of course, as there are various ways in which the Buddha can serve sentient beings, help sentient beings. For example, by showing physical miracles. But miracles cannot do that much to lead someone to the path of enlightenment, although to a certain degree it can help others. And similarly, by giving some blessings, physical blessings, the Buddha can help others to a certain degree, but not create the path as such for enlightenment, leading the beings to enlightenment and the paths and grounds and so forth. And so, how does the Buddha actually serve sentient beings? Is mainly by giving teachings. So the teaching here is that which he himself had actually experienced within himself while he was training in the Bodhisattva training on the path to enlightenment, and while he progressed along the paths and the grounds, he actually built up his own experiences to culminating in Buddhahood. And therefore, by the showing or giving teachings is the only means by which a Buddha can help sentient beings, by showing them the path that he himself had treaded. And therefore, from his own experience, the Buddha is able to give teachings to other sentient beings, and in this way help sentient beings to rid us of all our distorted views. And therefore, the Nagarjuna says to rid us of all distorted views, which means that the fact that we are suffering in samsara is because of the conditioned existential suffering, pervasive suffering that we are beset with. And this in turn comes from our karma and our negative emotions, delusions. And therefore, the delusions themselves, in order to eliminate the delusions, what we need to go to is to the root of those delusions, the negative emotions such as hate, attachment, anger, hatred, and so forth. And the root of all these delusions is the ignorance, which actually is a misconception of reality. And therefore, in order to rid us of all these wrong views, distorted views, the Buddha taught us that gave us the teaching of emptiness. And therefore, in this way, the emptiness, understanding and insight into emptiness actually counters this ignorance or misconception of reality. And therefore, Master Nagarjuna also says, so in this kind of distorted view or the misconception of reality, the ignorance is a kind of what is known as diluted or afflicted kind of wisdom or afflicted intelligence. And therefore, since it's a type of intelligence which is afflicted, what we need is a knowledge which counters it, a knowledge of the reality which counters that kind of distorted view. And therefore, Nagarjuna says the liberation comes when you actually put an end to the karma and delusions. And karma and delusions themselves come from our constructed views, and these in turn come through fabrications or reifications, and reification is eliminated through the understanding of emptiness. And therefore, the total distorted view, to overcome it, we need to develop the knowledge about reality and not otherwise. And therefore, our practices, such as making prostrations and going around the temple, the recitation of mantras, prayers, and so forth, of course, add up to building this wisdom, but they are not the actual antidote, the counterforce to our ignorance. And therefore, we need to develop this wisdom, realizing emptiness, which is the only means to eliminate our ignorance. And ignorance here is this, some kind of a clinging to and a true existence in things. And therefore, the Buddha showed us that path, that wisdom, which can actually counter this clinging to true existence. And the teaching of the Buddha is for that purpose. And therefore, the view of emptiness or the understanding of emptiness becomes very important for us to develop within ourselves. And therefore, in the perfection of wisdom teachings, the Buddha says that when he says there is no this, no that, and so forth, it is for us to build this wisdom of emptiness. And therefore, in this way, by giving teaching in such a way, through his own experience, the Buddha helps us to rid us of all distorted views and leads us to enlightenment, as he has done so. And therefore, we have this prayer, which we usually recite during the bi-monthly confession ceremonies of monks and nuns, which says that just as the sunlight opens the lotus, likewise the sun of Buddha's speech, teaching, and lifts the world up, and therefore enlightens the world. And therefore, that I bow to you, Shakyamuni, the teacher, who has gone beyond sorrow. And so, of course, we do recite this verse during the ceremony, along with other, when we recite the Pratimoksha Sutra, but we really don't know the source of this very verse as yet. And then, what the Buddha does is show us the reality as it is, the true nature of things, which is emptiness. And therefore, Master Vasubandhu also in his Abhidhammakosha says that Buddha shows the right, correct path by seeing that reality, the truth of the path that he has experienced. And so, Buddhism is a major religion of the world and an Asian religion, and the people from China, Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Burma, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Laos, Mongolia, and Tibet the Buddhism for us is our traditional religion. But in the West, when I visit the Western countries, I usually emphasize, say that, of course, in those regions, in the Western countries, their traditional religion is Judeo-Christian religion, and then also there is Islam. And so I tell the people there that it's always better to stick to their own religion, follow their own traditional religion, rather than converting to another religion like Buddhism and other religions of Asia, because there's always going to be complication called psychological complications in people. And of course, there are few exceptions who can actually follow Buddhism without much complication and problems. But in generally speaking, I've always tell Westerners that it's more that their traditional traditional religion is more appropriate for them and as part of their culture. And so, of course, each country, each nation and people have their own culture, and therefore, in the West, you have Judeo-Christian culture, and it's more relevant to stick to that religion, your cultural, your traditional religion, and because of it having become your part of your culture, it's more easier to relate to these religions. Whereas people from China, Korea, Vietnam, Buddhism, Japan, and so forth, and our culture is more or less related with Buddhism, and therefore Buddhism is more appropriate. This culture imbued with Buddhism is more appropriate for us. So I always emphasize not about to convert to Buddhism and other religions to the Westerners, although there may be some exceptions, but then for the Koreans, for example, here today I'm giving you the teaching on Buddhist teaching, and I feel quite at ease to give this teaching to you because you come from a traditionally Buddhist country and traditional Buddhist culture, and therefore it's easier for me, and I feel comfortable to give you this teaching on Nagarjuna's text, Precious Garland.
그래서 여러분들에게 같은 불자로서 불교를 설명하는 데 어떠한 불편함도 없습니다. 중국과 한국, 베트남인들에게는 같은 불자이기 때문에 설법할 때 항상 편안한 마음을 가지고 있고, 또한 여러분들이 선교 때부터 믿어왔던 이런 종교에 제가 조금이나마 도움이 되고 기여한다는 점에서 무척 만족스럽고 기쁩니다.
다들 어이 남중에 디셔되게 지금 말하자다 아주 에시아의 남바 파면의 남바 인근소 다 먼저 들으면서 저집에 남바 저거랬어. 디셔되게 들으면서 저집에 남바 저거랬어. 좀 전에 가르쳤나? 아니 말하면서 망구지 지금 람더 룩스를 시셔도 손으로되기도 와. 변화도 배워 차시네. 다 최도 소식을 되네. 또고 지 캐버즈다 이메 소리시 바지 샤샤. 아니 하나도 최소람도 제 라마를 태워자. 아니 교수님 다 구조스물 교수시 시스거데 구조스물 무슨 마신 버체. 내들은 뭔고 투뇨. 아니 대화 히말라야 리뷰. 대화 침배 거들이야. 어떤 계시는 그 미들 투배 거들. 장소다. 쉬유 된 남을 봤어. 남바인스. 남왜 쳐서 가랬어. 계시잖아요. 남왜 쳐서 돼. 산절이 되어서 저를 되어서 괜히 되어서 남왜 쳐서. 어디 해서 또 산절 되어서 산절에서 가래지. 신면사. 망세들이 신면사야 돼. 아니. 오늘 산절 좀 된다다. 아니 원주도 첨주도 저 찍버리지. 찍버렸어. 자사가 다디 게를 나중에 안도 되게 써야 돼. 마와 담배 봐서야 돼. 임바디 지금 마셔나. 아니 저번에 네가 나타 담바 이슈 마시게 담바 야래. 아니 같이 있는 모하메드 담바 야래. 민디디 명만은 저번에 네가 나타 진주 베다 사야 먹고 야로다. 비길 팽겨로다. 담바를 하다. 다 레디네 다 디디 아니 땡중고 담사야 돼. 송에 수직면 도와. 땡중고 담사야 돼. 다르게서 천리고 더네. 퀀텀 피직스 해야 돼. 퀀텀 피직스다. 그 웃음기 떠주 나래야 땅전 째네. 수제 다 차지 참에. 예. 수제기 처리야. 아니 초체 또 딱제 세변이나 니야 견에 매대바다디 컨트로피스를 하디 찍버려. 아야. 자다들이 인들 뭐야도 멋있는데 자갈 체를 붙이기 라자 라마나사. 공기니 컨트로피스를 하디니 zamuli digana da chi ripasawar chatiaris Dalai ya ne luru suna le titus quantum physics ningdunti da de dana da wasa de gang ruorda ngoni ji mo zhu sa de gang ruorda ngoni ji mo zhu sa de gang ru yo yin de zane Dalai ya lo ni dong ko ne de zhu de ne ni sa sha en mara Dalai ji de zane mara bo ba ni ge sa ma de sha su da sha sa de 시르니 문화리가 숙미 잠에 침면세 숙 동보 동보니 수사 때때 컨퍼런스 수고로다 치수를 잘 손들 다다 제일부터 낭세고 가나 안다 딱제증의 뉴뉴르도가 치료 숙전 간다 컨퍼런스 사디 딱자리 딱든 전에 이쯤에 좀 시기하래 사실은 인도산에 때 가서 우리에게 좀 된데 숨은 나로리야 다음에 봐 동반이 이런식의 송세하디 다 천리부 타네네 딱 로수르 네베타네 딱제 체인도 자네 다 니기메도 베디가 레고도 사티드인데 저거다 전전대간다 담바다다나네 하 자미 다 친로 진짜면 담바상으로 요아레 미시라레 자셔샤레 나머지 그거는 샤베이나 지금 이슈 담바다 가지 담바다 지금 무디부 담바다 제 네, 뭐는 지금 샴페인 럽진 장에 뒤에 지금 사야도 주스면 주버지신 패시 럽토리. 라. 라라 뒤지 주버스. 근데 좀 된다기 그게 뭐의 내주의 뒤에 거리에 뒤지 차지를 뒤니 샹도제가 있는데 송구도가 송나도가 자자가 뒤에 있잖아요. 다 담바도 장가서 민도라시 다 로동라정이야. 다 bekännen werde, da Chao-Mongol, Chao-Mongol, der Pendo Chungde Goro, Tarini Pendotoga. But again, Moshivana, but I'm not that Moshimonguyari, that one at Tanek Ishichava, Hindu Chava, Kaji Chava, Jugu Chava, Shimana Tanek, Sabasango, Shan Shamdi Junge, Pendo Chitting. Yahudoa. Said the Yuzane, Dabati, Milpenga, the Pendo Charota. That 담바다가 젠자주 나라 에야 소소직 초롱 젠네 다 초보적 되는 게 용되게 그래서 남배 나래 초보적 되는 거 배배 남배 나래 초보적 되는 거 자자가 디코 제라고 소소다 그 상로 자총자 부수 도자 초롱 상황을 심어봤다 디 그 젠자고 있게는 뭐도 미 가사 제라고 있게는 뭐도 디 최근 말로 다 드리켜 하셨나 순이다 시야 또 시그리다 세부터 세기도가 데 가지 쳐게 말아 데 가지 쳐 냠내지 치네 저라고 지기 로빠 주 내가 로 쳐송네 다들 내가 전 하대 들어와 저한테 인도산에 나 간다 어떤 병원에 전에 진심으로 셨다 뭐 뒤에다 나배원에 샤나지 산지지 산지 상승을 들어서 돼야 이내다 땡진데 그런 중에서 숨에도 또 냐지 못 하면 되고 사와도 띵안도 시작을 아도 시 담바서 집에서 시네 아도 하간 집을 세워주는 배시 이슈 하간다 가지 하간도 찍어야다 그래서 나와 하간도 찍었기도 당간주 하간 여러분 다시다지 사실 찍었기도 겨울스도 제가 어떻게 이드 근데 저들이 인도 간다 담바 컨디션데 메시지 담바테 순셔베 최들라 최 담바테 순셔베 순들 딱제체네 에 코도 와서는 겹고요 그래 별은 아주 미지네 시 프로페서 인신 명성이에 그냥 지금 누가 다고 프로페서 오늘 전에식 생이 참마 상대디 코랑 그 집에 지 티시스 티브도 저 컨저도가 다 되게 더 때네 다 되면 전에 프로페서 배 센터에서는 이샤로 프로페서 돈데 배 교르샤 아니 드라마도 스페 직접으로도 인디 프로페서에서 저 라야 and professor Java should to the living mark. Sazaga Saturday do that. Kanda meet Kavachi sending in the Messadi, the Lubshavel Latane, Kavai Mission. And this seemed to be even said, the Jalamria those, Lord and Dawat those stand. And it's so much to. So the reason that number Monguya Vananeta, Sanjum den there, Dabasum den there, the Kandijimi, Kong Sungsho de la de. In the Kong General to Tatapoto, you have to contest to her. The two street one. So the Indu, Turunishube, the number of Sadi, Nambe Shene. And then number check Tabayo to join a Turnish to give the number. Number two, Mashabache, and it just and some Tamja said, Mark and some Tamja 6 grand carry and the church I'll put out of the Yundoachi, Sasset turned out the Jig, and it did a Sasset turned out of the Delia, to which you then the Yondigatua. And Gobba Penzuin, carry young to the Yundoa. That is in kind of mention or page. Sanjay Josu Church Josu Sigo day, Lali moment all the Chatan Chori Chan and Dendrita, the Cheve Shamdishutua, Peve Shamdishutua. Saturday in the other, the Turushi number Chor said, the Sanjay with Shemachi. Sanjay with Shen and Tabatochon, that the Turushi number. Susan Karanzo, Turushi number Chorta, just one. 아주 거리에 나와이 와와와와와와 그때 뒤지고 와야 말이야 셔서
아시아 대부분의 그 국가에서는 그 조상 때부터 불교를 믿어왔습니다. 저는
So usually when I give, I tell people, especially the Buddhists, those who are traditionally Buddhists, that we should become 21st century Buddhists. And so why do I say this? Is because, of course, we say that we are Buddhists, but we more or less take the teaching of the Buddha as part of our, custom, and not really pay much attention to study the text and the teachings. And so even amongst Tibetans, we have such people who know that we have so many different teachings and scriptures and so forth. But then the common people usually have this kind of an attitude that, oh, these teachings are meant for the lamas and the monastics and not really for us. So this is totally wrong. And then when I visit, even in the Himalayan regions, like Ladakh and so forth, when I visit these places, I meet with locals, and then I ask them, "Are you Buddhist?" And they say yes. And then I ask them, when I ask them what is Buddhism, and they say, "Oh, it's about taking refuge." They recite this verse of taking refuge, that I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, and I take refuge in the Sangha. And so this is what Buddhism is about. And so meant by Buddhist. And then I asked, do you really know what a Buddha is, who a Buddha is? And they don't have any answer. They say they don't know. And then when I still press more question, like, do you think the Buddha and other gods of other religions, like Shiva and so forth, are they all same? And they say ignorantly yes. And so if you really don't know the unique teaching of the Buddha himself, you will say this kind of thing. And so it's important for us to really understand that the Buddha is someone who is an incomparable teacher. And without understanding that, you will give that kind of answer. And so the teaching of the Buddha is unique in the sense that the Buddha has taught pratitya samutpada, the dependent origination of things, the fact that things are interdependent, interrelated, and so forth. And no other teacher has given this kind of teaching. And regarding this teaching, it is also very similar to the quantum physics, the theory of saying that there's nothing objectively existing. And of course, quantum physics, modern physics, is more focused on meta, external things, and not so much on mind as such. And therefore, this idea or the concept of called quantum physics that is found in quantum physics is already taught in Buddhism. As I have an Indian friend who was Indira Ramana, and an Indian nuclear physicist, and he once told me that regarding quantum physics, it is in some kind of a new idea in the modern world. But then in India, this very concept has already been explained over 2,000 years ago by Master Nagarjuna, because he saw one text written by Master Nagarjuna in which he found this same concept of quantum physics, which is to say that Master Nagarjuna explicates the idea or the concept of dependence by designation. So things are merely designated, and therefore he told me that because of this he felt very proud to be Indian, and so of course science does not focus on much on the mind, but on the external things. So when even the scientists who are in a way non-partisan to any kind of dogma, and even they say that this kind of quantum physics is the idea of quantum physics is very similar to the teaching of the Buddha. And of course there are other teachers of other religious traditions, as we know, and there are many different major religious traditions such as Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, and so forth. And of course the founding teachers of these religions were really great beings, and they could of course give blessings to their followers and help them in many ways. And even their teachings are really great, emphasizing on friendship, compassion, love, and so forth. But when it comes to really teaching the dependent origination, it is only the Buddha who has given this teaching. And it is even said that the Buddha sometimes can even assume the form of or appear in the form of evil beings in order to help others. And so where this kind of thing works, the Buddha is even said to appear in that form and help others. And so I have many friends from the other religious traditions, like Jews, Christians, Muslims, and so forth. And I can say that all these people and the founding teachers have really benefited on the world. So many people have been helped by these religious traditions, and I know there are those followers, my friends, who are actually involved in helping others who need help. And but then what we also find is that in the name of religion, people really fight over religion, and this is not really because of the teaching itself or the teachers, but it's an individual matter in a way. And so because of some kind of attachment to their own religion, their own tradition and lineage and so forth, people fight over them. It even happened amongst Buddhists, and then particularly Tibetan Buddhists have this kind of fighting amongst themselves. And then if we look at the Islam, there are the Shia and the Sunni also fight, and this is not the fault of the teacher or the teaching itself, but it's the followers because of their grasping and attachment to this kind of their kind of belief systems. And then with regard to temples, of course, unlike Buddhists and there are the other religions like Islam, Christianity, and so forth, have more exquisite, grander kind of temples and mosques and so forth. If we, as Buddhists, think of our own temples, maybe we can boast about Bodh Gaya, but look at Bodh Gaya, it's not so grand as such, and therefore the teaching of dependent origination is the one that we have to focus on, that we should understand it, that it is the unique teaching of the Buddha. And so based on this teaching, then we could kind of infer what kind of teacher the Buddha was, the knowledge and his understanding of things and so forth. His qualities can be inferred through his teachings, in other words, of dependent origination. For example, if we want to assess a professor and the knowledge of a professor and so forth, what we can do is we can actually examine his writings. Like if the professor had done his dissertation for PhD and so forth, we can actually check that dissertation and then see what kind of how knowledgeable the person is and what kind of qualities the person has and so forth. And we cannot make this kind of assessment just by looking at the physical appearance of the people, like whether they are bearded ones or without beard, or whether they are fat or thin and so forth. You cannot do that when you want to really check the knowledge of the person. And so it can only be checked through by analyzing, investigating, and examining their behavior over months and years and so forth. And so similarly, it is the case with when we examine the teaching of the Buddha, we need to go into the quality of the Buddha himself. We need to examine his teachings and then find the uniqueness of the Buddha's qualities in terms of his by checking into his teaching. And of course, we as Tibetans always make prayer for the happiness of all sentient beings. But then while making this kind of prayer, what we actually do in our day-to-day life is fight over very trivial things sometimes. And we are full of negative emotions, hatred, attachment, and so forth. We always fight over trivial things. And so this is not the right thing. We need really to go into the depth of the teaching of the Buddha himself and then find or draw or develop our faith in the teaching and the Buddha himself by understanding the reality of the teaching itself. And therefore, this is what you as Koreans should also do. Try to understand the teaching of the Buddha based on reason and then find faith in the Buddha.
이런 식으로 해서 만약에 싸운다면 그것은 법에 그리고 또한 티베트인들이 그렇게 하는 경우도 격함이 있었는데 그것은 불법의 부처님의 가르침에 또한 티벳에 불명예를 가져다 줄 것입니다. 그래서 21세기의 불자들이 여러분들이 불교를 제대로 가르침을 제대로 알고 부처님의 부처님을 믿는 그러한 21세기 불자들이 반드시 되어야 합니다.
나야. 전에다 전에 와다 다들 좀 자. 다 안다. 산제베 처리야. 즉 시에는 타바 타바 정원이야. 산제베 처기 즉 위험으로 가서 때마 타다라. 과차가지다. 때마 타다 내가 시에 타네. 애니 소수벽에 거기 냠네요. 제가 다 소수수지. 별별 차샤네. 양지 지 거기 야 소수비스 나로 추루도 지든 되게 타네. 양지도 대하로. 이 한지게 트마 전에 쭉 그다음에 서로 양지 사자 남들 타네. 또 대하서로. 거기 지도네. 지 차게서 못된 되게 타네. 양지도 대하로 제 연구를 받아. 기록이네. 별로 와서 인주전에 한 거야. 즉 세주전에 한 거야. 즉 연구를 봐. 나 대탐절로 때바 진로단데 심시 과차서는 아니 오늘 전에 전에도 교육 그래. 마도 때바 진로단데 마심시 안 소스다 내라메 차린데 내라메 숨기신 러시브 찍어줘는 내 라마 딩을 컨트롤해야지 그냥 상담하는 마도 남음이다 천대 이외에 즉 흉지 고르디 매버진 베이는 그냥 마디 땜베 최대 니서 처리하는 마도 땜바 니서 차를 마도 땜바 용서로 고차하는 용도 가고로 봐 사자인데 인도 당가양 캐비니 무식입니다 장구 체제 이무이면 몇 가서는 가서 치세 낭세전에 로대야지 가서 시간이 된다 이런 거에 내술이야 즉 견쇼기 쇼기야 즉 반복으로 지된 리뷰 넣잖아 소소한 거 같다 같이 걸어 봐 카이라이지 걸어 ben songe 되어 있는 그 카이라이 캡산이었는데 개그를 캡산이 유셔로다 어디 되는 시간 아주 쉬어 냠내 시작했는데 카이라이 지기 판도에 여덟 듣고 그러면 다 같이 그게 가서 우리 그게 사실 카이라이 판도스 간에 매도 지려 아니 지금 돈도 전 좋아야 돼 고당으로 저들이 인도잖아요 전다 신다가 터는 고가다네 고 안드스는 별로 첩식이 내지고 터는 고가도 담에 있는데 즉 it is understandable 좋아 땅 최고 터는 고가다는 컨디션 뺏어고 근데 빼마서 그러다 저들이 인도잖아요 먼저 카이라이 간 땅은 남녀양 카이라이 간 로고 인도잖아요 거다 간다 제 수세소로 제 견주가 항상 남다인다야 항상 남다 전에 지나서 벽에 나셔 나한테래 거리한 견주시대 히말라야 주기 아주 지금 처치들 잘해 견주시대 만당 등민도 세대고요 저 지난주 때 대신체네 가다 보게 산제베 다 쳐봐 천여 상황 지기 최네 시에네 대바타발라 아니 대바지 남샤 시에버지기 저 들이 인도산에 캐베 좀 준비 캐바 마좀 세네 소야 되래 양 캐바 체네 시주 수주 되네 라레 메딩이지 다 캐베 좀 벌다 야 준비 캐바 마좀 세야지 준비를 쉬우셔 백한두개서 쉬우시고 가게 마신 시대에는 준비 캐바 좀 벌다 다 되면지 다 오늘 전에베 라멘 친이를 기준 인덴스 아니 기준 상수 좀 봐서 시거로 어떤데 아주 지도 닝베크도리야 미리수를 기준 상수 좀 시대고 당도 지도 사바 다 등두기 시행으로 즉다 등두기 소르다 가다 지단 시행을 다 당도 전에 아주 지금 부구집에 참을로 시행 과를 로종 과를 선당 아주 시행을 더 나치다 지금 뒤주지로 들으시게 들을 때다 계속 상승 좀 봐야 돼. 민용시지가 마샤브시시. 나도 망소 거라 계속 상승 좀 봐야 거야. 다들 개정 버리. 근데 제가 교제야. 미래 현지수 랑샤수 상부연대 랑샤수야. 뒤에 천르고 되다 레벨 천르고 개발된대요. 건수도 딱제체인데 북춘주 지금로 숨쉬체도 춘주들이야. 리무된제 리무나리아 지기 라체베 리무 토인드스네 부고도 가나식도 지기를 나바께래 리무 토인드스네 부고도 마가식도 부로 니숨다 저는 천리부지 좀 가르쳐 걸스라베이나 매일 현지디 지기 참부쳐야 지기 자차베이나 데 가부치다지 지기리야 간다체베이나 마가용다지 매일 현지를 도스 대단 미 현지의 정신이 참지 정신을 사실다 말하지 무시 규라면 나를 여 리기에 줍질이야 근데 시기야 자상아 어떤 아주 배전하래 여를라 다 드리께서 생리부터 심주도 샤인잖아요 다 세르고 멍구지 와다 미 현지의 정신이 미상부를 샤스 드시도 저들이 인도잖아요 말하지 사물로다 계속 상승 좀 받지 않다니 개심물이 자기들 인도산에 개배연대 준비연대 뒤에 랑도 이직 삼백 모임 현재 판배 삼바든 들에서는 침배이나 계속 상승 좀 받지 않지 중얼이
그래서 불교의 천년 열애심을 알고 신심을 일으키기 위해서
So for us to to develop a faith which is based on understanding and reason, what we must do is we must actually have the study and understand the entire structure of the teaching of the Buddha, the general structure of the teaching of the Buddha itself. And so, for example, in the case of Tibetan Buddhist traditions like Gagyu, Gelok, and so forth, and what we have are tantric practices which are very unique to these different systems or the traditions. For example, in the Kagyu system, we have the Mahamudra practice, and then also in the other traditions, they have the practice of the black Vajrayogini and the wrathful Vajrayogini and so forth. And also in the Geluk system, we have the Ansapa's ear-whispered lineage teachings, and the tradition of Se ear-whispered lineage teachings and so forth. But without really having the understanding and knowledge of the entire structure of the teaching of the Buddha, merely focusing on the certain teachings which are meant for very specific disciples, and without really understanding the main thrust of the teaching, it will not have much effect. And therefore, even if you may say that so you have received this and that teaching as a kind of a personal or practical instruction from your Lama, you still must really be able to verify the authenticity of the teaching within the context of the general structure of the teaching as well. And so otherwise, even if you say that, oh, I'm doing this because my Lama says this, I mean, you really need to, you would be pushed to check what kind of teacher that Lama is. And therefore, if you find the Lama to be someone who has not much knowledge and understanding of the general structure of the Buddha's teaching, of course, certain instructions may be good, but then they will not have the same kind of effect, the right kind of effect within yourself. And so you need really to put the teachings within the context of the general structure of Buddhism, and then so that you can actually verify the authenticity of the teaching. So I'm really being quite straightforward here when I say that we really need to understand the general structure of the teaching of the Buddha. And I don't really know how to be polite in this kind of cases. I don't talk nicely to people. I'm quite straightforward and frank, and therefore, otherwise what happens is if we don't really point to our faults, our shortcomings, then it's almost like even if we know there are these faults within our traditions, our followers and so forth, if we don't really point to them but leave it like that by talking nicely, then it's like self-deception. So I don't want to do that. I don't really know how to act politely in this kind of cases. Of course, sometimes because of some political matters, people do indulge in deceiving others and so forth, and talking nicely and so forth. But then it's not really good, and that may be understandable when it comes to political things. But when it comes to our Dharma, that's not right. To not point out the wrong things that we are doing. So I criticize Tibetan Buddhist followers of the Tibetan Buddhist traditions in the Himalayan regions for what we are lacking, and to you also, the Koreans, I would like to do the same. That we must actually become knowledgeable in the general entire structure of the teaching of the Buddha to be able to do our practices in the right way, correctly. And therefore, in the Tibetan, we have this saying, do not undermine your nobility with scholarship. Do not undermine your scholarship with nobility. So what this means is that you can sometimes be very knowledgeable in the teachings of the Buddha, and but then when it comes to really being kind and humble and so forth, you are not there. You don't meet up to the measure. And on the other hand, there are people who are very humble, nice and kind, but then when it comes to really teaching the teaching of the Buddha himself, then they do not know much about the teaching. So what we need is both scholarship, learning, and being learned, as well as being noble and kind to others. And so in this way, we have to actually build both within ourselves. And today, we are in a world where we emphasize so much on education. I mean, emphasize education everywhere. And so, while we do that, what we need to actually produce is people who are well educated, learned, as well as being able to show kindness and nobility, and when it comes to dealing with others. And so even scientists, so the basic nature of human beings is this kindness, compassionate. And so even scientists today, through their experiments with children of very young age, 2-3 years old, and when they do this kind of experiment where they show some kind of animation wherein certain thing comes forth, and then when they show that this animal or in the animation comes forth and is being helped by another, when it's hurt or then it's being helped by someone, the children actually react positively. They like it. Whereas when certain thing that is coming towards them is obstructed by another animation, another animal in the animation, then the children actually dislike it. So what this shows for them is, through their own experiment and experience, is that the compassion is our innate nature in human beings, and therefore we need to become, we need to develop this compassion towards other sentient beings, be kind, and also while being kind, we also need to be knowledgeable and learn it in the teaching of the Buddha. So, in other words, what we can do, what we should do, I'm saying, is that we should become someone who is learned as Buddhists, learned in the teaching of the Buddha, and then also be kind and noble.
never like we should have touched so now the chivo to them medal double shiver gave songs. Never like we should have said, never like what done nearly want to nearly send shake to want to nearly send shakita, nearly said, never lepa. Never lepa said, Tasi, Tarbe, she ming number is a sochi, Pejimada. Never Targela Tarba said, Kangle Turkey, Kangi Turkey. 강 탈바래, 강도 탈바래서 상당고도. 다른 신기 아니 코라스르도 강기 코라래, 강도 코라래, 강기 코라래서 상당고도. 다른 신기 never leg과 시전에 다 never leg베 균전이 상당고로. 다 가다 시베피서 건지면 탈 급에 뛰는거야. 이대매다. 드리죠 봤다. 드리브 인도산에 치시 다른 진배 규련 등진디 안주 뉴리아 예베진달라 다 된진다 된디무 된지사데 치시는 랑게 규리아 내가 티시도 대신 기버 폭상지 되는 거야. 다른 진배 된진디 세소나 녀부께부터 좀 소나 아니 그 동네게 싸워 그다음 동네 기하게 배주 싸워놓고 매우 차별선에 이 동네를 땡도 타와래 근데 변한 건 한소 나서지 여도이나 나서 너수 자야게 지 가서 벤킬러인데 지 체스 지 심도 student 지 근데면 세대셔에 그 포상게 말 봐. 다 나서지 싸워는 주셔베이나 에코 달로 되지 하죠도. 어디 듣는시 뇽몽배 나자. 뇽몽배 내대 싸워는 시투어션 뭐좀 뭐도 단도 기워져 해야 말. 뇽몽배 내대 세서는 단도 기워져 하시도. 사진에 있잖아요. 뇽몽배 내래 탈외는 거지. 단도 대화다 포상 있잖아요. never like was. 대대병 예를 두야게 최대 다 돈이도 왜 싫어 다가가는 저들이 또 라버숨 그 쪼르디 수중을 라버디 그게 시딘르디야체 다 수중을 라베 시딘르지는 찬식이 누구로 거야 찬식 파육은 누구로 거야 찐 다디 용백급네 인 섬기다 바유 내뱉어내 전식 누버도 수수주 처리 집에 거를 아니 섬미벌 산이 돼야게 지집을 띵인진고 다 도스 야야 그 계약이 차진을 되고 조용히 알아봐. 수륙을 하고 거를 띵인을 하고 말돼 이네 수륙을 하고 때네 섬지집이 섬지집은 줘야게 누버로 고쳐주 철로 되고 전시를 간다 대 정답적이로 다 든지지가 와네 아니 수륙을 하고 시제 아니 참아야 깨네 참변 누버로다 예배거든요. 다 띵인지 섬지집부터 좀네 다 섬지집부터 지금 믿어봐. 다 변한다. 지금 차다지다든지 그래서 공소로 지금 지구로도 돼야지. 커수 나봐 매체. 아니 기부로 주는 그래도 새로 섬지집으로 떠서 요새데. 자사가 드디인데 나도 배배배지하래. 일본 도주스. 신기해. 일본 도주. 일본 리가리아 도가वर 차가वर 연구를 봐. 나는 일본기 속에 된 미미나 차블라다 뜻을 통두잖아. 제 도가व도 상태야지고 구조 뭐 주시 되고 있다. 구조 뭐 주시 되네. dollar 주니. 일본 dollar 주시. 도주 일본 도주스. 너 가다 지금 심지적으로 요새 패지 튼두서에 만들 생기. 기우르 좀 너버렇게 차도 너버렇게 많아. 봐. 엔다가는 지금 줄로만 그나리야 심지적이 땡지 줄로만 그나 여러 봐. 아니 모티브 줄로나 삼된 수미트 되겠다 냠니지야 여러 봐다. 봐. 자단 이시셔나래 나를 위해서도 다 벌거 되지한 지라는 자식이 도나 마실 때 패지 침면도 내 고야지래야 그리스 같은 그릭 오토독스 나로리아 리슴 지치베 띵지 고야게 아다 락레로 한데 예배서 미치게 권유 십주식입니다야 십중에 메시 so 되지 사들이 이르서는 띵진기 투모레 지난 투모레 다 띵진 메저베베리 이네 그 뭐요 거네 루모된다 고다 투모레 다 띵진기 때네 다 싫어를 먹고 거래 나또 녀mol을 갑자기 싫어를 더 싫어고 나네 내가르고 구조도 싫어 내루르고 전도도 싫어서 예배 나네 내루르고 전도도 싫어데 다 녀mol가 갑자기 너무 자대요 사들이 인도 never 러버숨드체 다 디나네 조도 싫어를 러버 대야 담에 더 보다 싫어지 셔인도잖아 아니 차와 그 서버로 그 낭성 테마스 먹고 던지 인루디 간 짜인 거야 던지 인루 간을 짜니 냐지로다 자 단니스는 그 지 두배고는 냐요 말에 kok각버리 각버디 뭐인가 말이 메가리 사다도 제가 난가로도 와서 신경지 그 녀도 사고도 와대 근데 이제는 차시 서울 나와당스 집어 타봐도 믿음배 스타워 슝쳐mol이야 지금 정다로 매댕이 집에 있나 아니 다 아니 동년 드셔 집에 있나 다 동반이들 접수체에서 샤샤래 이제 쉽게 그저 jasper도 와대 패지들이 지금도 여러분 제 다와르지 동이 쉽게 접수체 신을 하게 야로 떠서 열다 자자 다 드디 이거 패지다고 도와 집어 터다 믿음배스 터버도 믿음배서라 아니 딱으로서 계획송스 다야 좀진디 다유모의 유민주德기 유민 민주시 집어드는 데다 개발하는 데다고서 제가 어디 미시버스 내가 뭐를 전에 야오 지금 내가 마시나 아니 저 동반이 되게 즉 나요 말이스 아니 산제요 말이 동니요 말 사실 이거다 봐 야말 사대 나도 나오는 신들이 요 말이 뭐니 또요 말서 드디가 리거를 마도 그 돈이 있다 현다 파샤네 좀 된데 그 전장 대선도 마서 최기 다음에 캐랑에 넘지고 근데 정규 차샤네 탄여도 장제 세지신의 우모버즈 안다 지금 다 나오다도 주요 말이 이dun에 주요 말에서 타자 인도잖아요. 마텔린 거. 또가 the quantum physics that they pay out quantum physics objectively to your Mars. Pene, more to your Mars, I think I'll live to her. The quantum physics, more to me, the Takakamedu Sasoji. The dilemma, the Kadina Sasoji and Ligoro. Sanjum then you didn't remember the Tajani, the Minja Tayu Zamokane. 시징숑 나로리야지 최전의 개발 mon구지마 송사례제라 디자 탐제자 명점 다섬 슬럽잖아요. 또 예버도 소용도. 유루코 민구왕 예버 작외관의 예버. 다녀도 작외임 봐. 들어 다녀에 사무실이 메뉴가 텐드지기 때문에 다그 예버샤야 마도 된경 그게 덕신원에서는 또 된외병원에 그래야지 때문에부터 컨트롤피스도 찍고 차대요. 또 컨트롤피스도 숙젠갈 시거로 시베 가능한데 계셔 말이. 어디지? 저진데 인도 땅을 한수 그게 지금 가서래. 통원도 퇴바도 지금 양수녀 지금 뭐냐 그게 예도 버시다. 또 야마스도 있는 지금 하루실래지. 다 캔자십도 왔어. 내가 가지고 시행하다. 낭외초에서도 야오야랬어. 이제 낭외초 파파파파 푸들루는 가야 야말 쓰고 말이 이제 야오야말 따스네. 어디 쓰기 있어. 제가 어디 들으지 개발을 잡았어요. 다가다 쉐버총은 아니 뭐나 전에게 지금 당에 돈이 또 있습니다. 다 등에 디셔도 돈이 또도 시기스를 패시로 두고 맨저 가다 그 참도 와야 리기 하래. 예를 소스도 해도 쓰잖아. 아니 슝도도 막또 나래 냠뇽 계단에다 거기 슝네 셔셔니 또 두르는데 야 그러 되게 소스도 사실이 이르잖아. 그 쉬우시도 때는 딱와 쓰는데 남샤 탐자로 뭐냐 전에다 때는 딱와 레이 사바식 전투야지. 너무 쉬우시도 다 랑문에 두번 짐베 시체셔들이 애니코 거는 자용하지. 차당 용문들이 디모된지도 지금 총대에 있는 디모된지 규제에 될 때는 용도가 있잖아요. 어다 차당 걸로 뒤에 곧 마텐로 시주에서로 쭉쭉 다니면 그도라 차당 걸로 댄댄식 총도 요소도. 개발 쉬우도 같아. 저들이 인도 개발로 잡았어요. 돈이 안되게 돈이 슬러이나 선나 돌아내야 소리지. 여도가 어디지? 개발로 잡았어요. 소위.
그래서 이제 중반부만 너는 어제 이어서 하겠습니다. 어제까지는 그 증상세, 그러니까 상처에 많은 방법들에 대한.
So we are on verse number 25. So we have already covered the teachings pertaining to the higher rebirth, and now we are at the teaching pertaining to the highest excellence or definite goodness. And the text is on verse 25, which says, the factors of highest excellence appear as subtle and profound. Now, with regard to highest excellence, it refers to basically our liberation, nirvana. And so when it comes to talking about nirvana, we need to understand what who actually becomes liberated, who is liberated, from what we are liberated, and by what means we are liberated. And then when we talk about nirvana, we also need to talk about samsara, because the nirvana is that state which is going beyond samsara, out of samsara. Therefore, within samsara also we need to think about who is in samsara, who is samsaric, and where do we actually go in this and round in samsara, and who actually, what kind of what leads us to this cycle of existence. And so and in this way, what we need to think about is the reason for us to reach, why do we actually have to reach the highest excellence? In other words, we need to think about how we also should lead ourselves to that highest excellence. And so, when you think about it, we should understand that as long as this grasping, clinging to some kind of an independent, true existence and self and things remains within our mind stream, as long as this grasping is there, there's not going to be true happiness in us. And once this grasping at some true existence, independent true existence in oneself and other things is eliminated from within our mind stream, then we will no more have any suffering. And so this should be understood. And so it's like dealing with some disease and sickness. And we may give some kind of painkiller when the sickness is too intense, the pain is too intense. We may give the doctors may give some painkillers. But that will not actually get at the root of the sickness, the disease itself. And therefore, in order to cure the person of the sickness, we need to go to the root cause and therefore give the medication accordingly. And so once that is done, then the person will be cured of the disease and the sickness. And similarly, we need to deal with the sickness of the negative emotions and basically this grasping at true existence and things. And so, in order to do that, in order to deal with it, what we need to develop mainly is the wisdom realizing emptiness. And in order to develop this wisdom, what we also need to go through is the process of the development of the three trainings. And the first is that of the morality, the training of morality. And so with the practice of morality, what we do is we actually restrain from wrongdoings by constantly being mindful of where we are going, what we are doing. And while showing mindfulness, we also check within ourselves whether we are really focused in what we need to do, we should do, which is introspection. So these two factors of introspection and mindfulness, and it's also built while we practice morality and discipline. And because of that, what we also do is we build up to have the real experience of single-pointed concentration as well, which with a powerful concentration, then we can build the wisdom realizing emptiness as well. And so, in order to be able to stay focused single-pointedly on one object, we need to develop concentration, which comes through the practice of morality, which in turn helps the concentration helps build the wisdom. And so it's like when we sit in concentration, what we are doing is we are actually stilling our minds so that it's not distracted and it's not dull, and therefore we stay focused single-pointedly. It's like sometimes in certain areas, some kind of a rabbit, staying very still without moving at all. So the birds, the eagles, are not able to detect that there is a rabbit there. And so it's like we say that the Tibetan saying is that the rabbit has disguised as a stone. And so building concentration should be like stilling the mind, but here there is also clarity of what you are meditating on, not just dull mind, but clarity also has to be built. And so this practice of single-pointed concentration is there in Buddhism, and also of course I've heard that in certain in the past, in certain Christian monasteries, particularly I've heard that in Greece there is a monastery where they have the practice of meditation and single-pointed concentration, although I have not been able to verify that so far, but I've heard there is a practice of concentration or meditation in Christianity as well. But here, when we deal with overcoming or eliminating this clinging to some true independent existence and things, this ignorance, in other words, words, we have to build the three trainings. In the main thing that we have to develop is the wisdom realizing ultimate reality. Although there is also wisdom which understands the conventionalities of things, like conventional subjects, how things are in conventional terms are, and so forth. But ultimately, it is this realization of ultimate reality or emptiness. And when we, of course, realize emptiness through reasoning and so forth, we need also to understand that emptiness is realized in a certain aspect where the mind does not kind of reify the things. It's in the emptiness appears to the mind as some kind of a negation of the true existence, and therefore, in this way, we need to think about reaching the highest excellence through the wisdom of emptiness. And so that is what is meant by this verse, this line, the factors of highest excellence. And then it says it appears as subtle and profound. Of course, for those, and therefore, emptiness or the ultimate reality is something which is very profound and very subtle, and it takes time and effort for us to actually gain this realization of the ultimate reality. And so with regard to this, some people who have attended my teachings so many times may think that, that His Holiness gives so many teachings, talks so much about emptiness, but then for us, we really don't understand much, and therefore we just have to say, I take refuge in you, His Holiness. And so, what we need to do is really build this understanding by using our reason, intelligence that we use, that we have. We should use it and try to get to this point of understanding emptiness. Otherwise, without understanding, the text says the childish bereft of learning are thus frightened, and so the victor says. And so and people who say that His Holiness teaches this emptiness too many times, but we don't understand, and of course should not feel discouraged, but then they should actually put effort in understanding the emptiness. And without knowing this emptiness well, then people sometimes say, the teaching of the Buddha is about there being not I, no emptiness, and then this and that, no this and that. But it's not right to say that, because if you don't understand emptiness well, you may say this. But to understand emptiness well means that you actually reject any kind of independent, intrinsic existence in things and self. And it's like also quantum physics, which is very good to understand that things do not have any objective existence at all. And so the Prajaparamita Sutras also say that after having gone through the various topics like form and so forth, and at the end of the certain section, it says all this is mere name, all this is mere designation. So what emptiness is about is that that things do not have any independent objective existence, and we are not denying things as such, our experiences of pain and pleasure and so forth, but that the things do not have any existence the way they appear to us, as if they have some kind of objective existence. That's not the way things are. And so we sometimes find this kind of teaching shocking to us, but as I have some friends who have told me that, of course, Buddhism is very good, religious tradition, but then at the end of the day, what it says is that, there's no this, no that. So they get to the point of saying that Buddhism is almost like nihilism, but that's not the case. And when you really put effort and use reasonings and really, endeavor to familiarize your mind with emptiness, you will be able to gain insight into emptiness. As far as I'm concerned, I do not claim to have any realization of emptiness yet, but I can still at least say that I am almost there. And so, when you are able to really understand, gain this kind of understanding of emptiness well, then that there is nothing independent, objective existence in things, although they do appear to us as if they have this kind of way of existence. And then what you can do is you can actually shake the root, the root of all these negative emotions, attachment and so forth, and you see that what attachment and anger actually focus on, what they see is not really true, it's just illusion. And so what we need to do is make effort. And so this is what we need to do when it comes to what the Amdo was called Tongwani or emptiness. We need to really put effort.
집착이 탐진의 어떤 근거가 되는데 그러한 그 집착들이 떨어져 나감으로 인해서 그 탐진의 근거가 떨어져 나감으로 인해서 탐진의 어떤 번뇌가 완전하게 줄어든다는 것을 확실히 경험하게 됩니다. 그래서 저는 공성이라는 그 똥방이라는 그런 말을 들으면 굉장히 마음이 기쁩니다. 한일없습니다.
다 캐반으로 잡고 세는다 소야디 다 좀세마 패지 정규비 소리도 다 캐반으로 잡고 세루 가르쳤잖아. 봐. 기군들이 멀고 은지발에 중요하다. 세. 다 기관 간다스 코업에 심지했잖아. 야원으로 코업 수준에 석진이 내지 풍부 아다다 샤완스는도 다 풍부를 땐데 되네. 나는 코업에 심지 되는 멀고 은지발에 중요하다스. 심지 코라다 은지를 중을 쓰고 말돼. 딱 가다 코업에 차야 코라 은지가 중요해스. 나서 왜 동네 세타 매버전 용대야. 동네 진짜 용기 다도 동네 줄 당도랑 저도 되겠지. 지주준 소리도 와. 동네 돈도 로이야. 동네니로 뭐죠. 대원도장 팀모베 랑게 대와 자들 좀 사다 들어. 그래서 우리 뒤가 차샤나 미 동주지 상황로 동네면도 대원도 살아. 이제 동네 뭔지 미전이 있어야 동네도 와. 세상 딱 그러잖아. 동네면도 버려 봐. 이제 동네 뭔지 가는 소리가 속도 와. 세상 동네 돈들로 이제 동네니로 뭐 죽사들이셔. 대원도장 팀모베 랑게 대와 자들 좀 지 샴페인으로 쳐야 샴페인 주야 대주제에 다 대화를 하는데 뒤집중 소리를 지시 다 독스도 되게 와 저때 인도 기본적인 말로 봐 은지발을 좋아한다 다 들으려 동네기 풍부 가서 샤워도 로데야 다디 가리 남았으나 너무 못 당지고 좋아해스 은지발 은지네 좋아해스 진짜 인도 나인지네 기고로 편법직도 개회 송스 말해 편법직도 송에 송스 자상가 다 들리기 동네면도 그러지 다 동네기 싸워칭에 동네기 댄칭에 열리기 풍부 영향이 돼 아니 당진기 지역이 공내 딩어는 지도 신내 아니 다음에 따와도 소리스 다유 더기 여자분들은 담배 통돌로 알아서 로리야 지 리심니로 왕중에 나 세야지 시푸데 지금 여대버지 나오냐별로 디께스 나오냐별로 되기 미국 나선 지금 여대버지 로시아 되거다. 저들이 이르잖아요. 다유 더기 여자봐 다 여봐다. 아니 더기 나도 너희와 세야도 송도가 나도 너희와 자 아니 너희에 딱 아니 롱제제 다 아니 너희에다 쳐 나이류 아니 나이 롱제 나이네 자다 도시로 되거라. 자 이제 인도 다유 더기 여자분 니네 담배 돈도 딱 먼저 전에 그게 뭐에 내주도하는 상담에 있는 된지기 더기 송내가 나서야 돼. 로 나오는 시야 말이지. 그봐 남베 이르잖아요. 가사데 주선도 주시면 근데 누구도 지금도 저다다 이제 가다 남메두잖아요. 나이사하게 나디에다 매듭을 차용 거 같은데 인데 나이롱 나이를 송야디에 당연하다 뒤쪽이면로 나이를 송야서 풍부드자 자네 된저기다 슝디마도 대윤의 패치디 아니 된지 뒤송기 요소도 콜로 당부코도 가사다면 송 뒤지고 가서 당겨봐 최지담에 다 풍소 대버즈베 댄진디 뽕고에 왔다 디페지 송고도 돼. 니네 담배 돈으로 다다 되게 요즘은 담배 돈으로 강실 양다 지도와 용수 시베 니민 중스. 대권은이 양다고 돼. 지도하신도 시베 Any lot give a hina, Nayu Sabajita, Nayu Sabe, any lot de Yungumaris. Ta Nanzin Lechung, Pungunam, Nanzin Tenet, turn to June, Kanka Sabe, Zuba de Jawata Bakalashix. So ta Nanzing Wangi Chadang Yumongi, Chadang Yumongo Wangi Lessa. That's all in it, Sele. Said that Pungula Chakbe, Dala Chakbe, Dashada, Pungula Sebe, Chakba, that Tigi, and Punguchiman Yinzuja, Deyutua, Deja Chayutua. Deja de Yonsa de Marzimilotic Chayungarwa. Sadine Duzane Nanzin Leju, Pungunam, any Pungu, any Tabayonshin Maris, Karislana. Drebu Pungu di Dubji, do Nanzi Sadi, Chilo Chatiaris. Nanzi and the Dundu. Kanka Saban Zuba take Yawata Bakalashi. Sanya. Now Digi Ganda any Pumbu Demi, Dog Yavata, Pumbu Denzingi, Kansaga Denzingi, Shichi Yavata, Dima, Dayang Sosto. That Pumbu Tetra Mizemba Tone, Nanzi Bon Jules, Nanzi Bata Paneni. That's also the Pungso Dube Church, Damber Meba, Tong Duzane, the Pungso Church, Damber Tong, Damber Meba Ship, Lord, the Church Damage, but Church Damage of a sheriff chair. Or Church Damage, that Church Damage of a sheriff the casual shares. Kanta Pumbu Tenzing Shen Sun Chung and Never Matopato. And the Kansa Tenzin, Chamut Dotuk Maris. That Kansa Tenzin Lia Tenzin Rakwa. Peruchashina Tenzin Gunda. Kansa Tenzin Gunda. Taxirang Dado Zimbe Zibati, Kansa Tenzin Rakwa Dina ne Gunda. That Kansa Ranju to be Zaidu was Zimbati, Kansa Tenzin Zibatangi. Tell a Nancy Nichene. Kasa Pungu the Sini, Midubas Zimbati, Kasa Zimbati, Gunda. Kasa Pungu the Sini, Tubi Raja Zimbati, Kasa Tanzi, Rakpa Langi. That Kasa Raji Zimbati, and a Kasa Tanzi, Chamuta the Chaja. That did dog we are. Does it on a da meba Tong Zangi, Dadu Zibi, Denzing Tawin, you won't talk to Marva. That was Yamyon than Shingrava. Kasa Ranjo to be Zayu to Zimba Dog by Yenaya, Kasa Raji to Zibba Tegi of Induzane, did Dami Kaso Shuti. Dami Rapa Rabe Tunji, Shin, Dean, Cheva Mania Bejinglia, Dami Chamu Turn, Chilo, Dotting, Loti, Getoxes. Dami Chamu Induzane. Any Kada Rashi about toys and Rashi was Zimba ticket and Yambo Kane, teach about Mania Berilla, Kansa Raja to be Zedu to be Zimbata. Any Kansa Toji Raji Dada Ajaja, did it get a bit of the Savador. Some down the Shashtoa, just sorry Ashtoa. So the name is any that digi Umavenali, any Nunjubinyambo. Lia Chidam Dog Maris, Nunjubinyabo Kansa Damidon Tree, Chidami, the Shidubinyabo Sumegi Umawita, the Kayungi. That Kanda Numo that Pumbu Demi Dog Race, that is so. Dr. Kansa regime of Tonya, Chijimalo Tonya, Kansa Kanto Taveshi, Pungso regime of Tonya, never to God is the Distungiare. Toning Nanzi. News. Nanzi Bada Panani, Chini Pumbu Jumi News. That Nanzi, Nyambukini, Nanzi, Doyundu, any Tewangi, Telatan and June, Chadan Kigmari, Telatan, Lesagmari, Tendindu, any Nyelingi Pumbu Yungumaris. Chidr Melon, Dennis, Ranshi Sunyan, now make it 10 young than he to the Juse County member, teaching Pumbu Nam Den and Nanziban and Miburju. Rangi Shinji Sunyan Shin, Yanda need to take on me. Children Melon, Madame, Ranshi Sunyan Menanda, Pumunola Madame, Nazibayan Tatandas. 제가 메로나게 손이 아니 제시그 손이 제신도 나나 제신이 동안 나시 풍불로 때네 주등에게가 모니지 주반다고 강나 강을 때는 따고 풍부디에 모니 주버도 나요 그여데 나왔다도 믿어봐 와다 모니지 주버 때네메 사바시게 거다 유진의 주버 때네메 사바시게 다 최별로 시게요 뭐 이나 아니 만져는 누구지 스티송하래 파고공고 오이니 대답이 된퇴네 초를 믿도 더니 이 결론으로 대대매 세네 아니 다 모두 태고 투문 영서가다 가서 캐래하게 아니 지 나 태명은 도시오면도 태명은 도지는 나올래 그러나 손이 오어되버다 아니 가서 손은 신 소취 주부를 셔서겠다 투문 되나래 된데 송샤가 주제 자회 공부디 다음에 배전도 송고야리스 그래서 수 오어되버 소취 주부는 시 송샤디 정심이 배전이 있어도 송고야리 추지 당시 아니 가서 시디를 되게 되죠 송셔버 되죠 다 가사가 담에 라고를 자야다 야는 미다고다 지게 된대로 봐 자야 되는 송고도가 어떤지 선지 송고 요소리 파복군 거고 더위 아니 지게 태명이 던 도즈나리아 송셔버 되죠 제디 자와디 아니 담에 참모들로 공부시는 송고야 대답이 된퇴네 철을 믹토스 어다디 대전 수 대전을 보고 통한테 최동호스 수 최동한테 디시고 통호스 송샤다 최디 니체 봐 다 가서 그렇게 타님의 준비 최치다 타도기다 준비 최치체는다 타도 준비 최디 다人性动员当面常务的钱真正这边的去给密通的然去了密通的去年特度这去特度少了的刚才但的那个不如个日记成那人少了早修那说那些三件那就去的吧但把你的养到担心的但把你钱的是不是开什么程度啊我们这个那里呀现金挂呀唱了里头当然了现金挂哇定义些故事现在的都是送用的话，实际上就是这些。现在去了没说等你已经跟了那个带的买现在，但就是，的，俺了把它啥，俺了把它啥说。
Break here.
그런 점이 없어 들어간다고 부처님께서 말씀하셨네요. 이런 그 어리석은 자들이
So we're on verse number 26, which His Holiness also had read, which says, I does not exist, nor will it. Mine does not exist, nor will it. While the childish are frightened by this, for the learned, it ends all fear. So this was explained in connection with His Holiness's own experience of emptiness, saying that he has no real experience, but he's almost there. And so for those who are learned, who are wise, emptiness will not cause any fear in them, but will give the real understanding that things have no objective existence, in other words. And then verse number 27, His Holiness read through 27 through to verse number 34, and 27 says, verse number 27 says, sentient beings without exception arise due to grasping of I, grasping at I, and for beings having a grasping at mine, the one speaking solely to benefit, thus said. And so what this means is that we, of course, although we want happiness, we are beset with suffering. Why? Because we have this grasping at some kind of I or ego grasping at some kind of independently existent I or self, and because of which, even though we don't want suffering, we cause ourselves more suffering. And so suffering, in many cases, we can see that we the human, it's our own human creation. And therefore, in order to overcome what we have created ourselves, what we need to do is to really go into the root of this suffering, the cause of suffering, which is this grasping at some true existence, truly existing I or self. And so this is the root, and therefore Master Shantideva in his Bodhisattva Charya Avatara, the Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, says, although they do not want suffering, they run after the cause suffering, which means that we create more causes for ourselves to suffer more. And although they want happiness, they destroy it as if destroying some enemy. And so without really knowing the reality of how things are, in other words, being ignorant about the truth, how things really are, that they do not have any independent existence, but they are dependently originated, but because of not understanding that, and we cause ourselves more suffering. And so therefore, in order to help sentient beings to overcome this clinging to self or clinging to I and mine, the Buddha, the one who speaks solely to benefit, means the Buddha has thus spoken. And then next verse says that I exist and mine exists are ultimately false. As for those who understand reality, these two do not exist. And again, it says that we have this clinging to the I, some kind of an ego grasping, and because of that, we lead ourselves to clinging to mineness. And so because of this clinging to mineness, then we think about my body, my resources, my wealth, my families, relatives, and so forth. And similarly, we have the same kind of chain of kind of grasping at some truly existing, independently existing, called I, my body, my resources, and so forth. And so in reality, what we have to understand is that the things do not, including yourself, your self and mindness and so forth, they do not exist the way they appear to us to have some kind of true independent existence. And therefore, when we talk about this mindness, the grasping at mindness, it is mainly related to the grasping at this body, not just a body, but the aggregates, the psychophysical aggregates, in relation to which we think about mindness. This is mine, and so forth. And so, in the first reel of the teaching, the Buddha has actually taught the selflessness of persons only, whereas that is not sufficient to overcome our grasping at true existence of everything. And therefore, we also need to understand or gain insight into the selflessness of phenomena. And therefore, in the next verse, it says that I exist and that mine exists ultimately false. And for those who understand reality, these two do not exist. And so, mindness or selfhood do not have any kind of intrinsic independent existence is what it means. And so we need to also understand, and in the next verse it says, as for the aggregates arising from the grasping of I, the grasping of I itself is ultimately unreal. For that whose seed is unreal, how can its production be real? And so what happens here is, what this shows is that because of our clinging to this self, independently existing self, this ego grasping, what happens is we also create or come up with attachment. We become attached to some things and we averse certain others. And so and because of this, we create karma, which in turn brings us suffering. And therefore, it's not just enough to overcome the grasping at a personhood or a self, but also we need to overcome this grasping at the psychophysical aggregates. In other words, the grasping at the true existence of phenomena. And because that gives rise to attachment to because of our attachment to the psychophysical aggregates, we have attachment to give rise to attachment, anger, and so forth, and then accordingly create karma, and we suffer. And therefore, when you see that this grasping at the self itself is, in other words, untrue, false, then you will be able to see that this grasping at aggregates also is false. And therefore, when you are able to see the lack of any true independent existence in the psychophysical aggregates, then you will be able to also overcome this grasping at some true existence of self as well. And therefore, the grasping at true existence of psychophysical aggregates is shown to be the basis for grasping at true existence of a self as well. And in this, and therefore, and so as long as Nagarjuna, Master Nagarjuna also says that as long as there is grasping at true existence of psychophysical aggregates, to that extent there will be the sense of I and mine, and therefore you have this division between I, mine, and so forth, and then causing attachment and so forth, and suffering as well. And therefore, within the understanding of emptiness or selflessness, you have to understand the selflessness of phenomena, which in turn helps us to get rid of the grasping at self of a person as well. And therefore, within the self of a person, grasping at the self of a person, there are various degrees of subtlety as well. For example, grasping at some kind of a Atman, which is posited by certain religious schools, such as an Atman which is permanent, single, and autonomous, which is a very gross form of grasping at the self. And then there are subtler ones, which is, for example, the grasping at some kind of substantially existent self-sufficient I or self, and within which there are two. One is called seeing this substantially existent I as having called similar attributes or characteristics as the aggregate, which is grosser than the other one, which is seeing or perceiving this self-sufficiently existing substantial I as having no characteristics of the self or aggregates. And so in this way and then finally the subtlest form of grasping at self is the grasping at a self which is independently objectively existing I or self. And so in this way, when we understand the degrees of subtlety within the grasping of self of a person, then what we can also see is that as long as the subtler ones remain within our mind stream, the grosser ones still will persist. And although you may understand, you may have the insight into the gross level of selflessness. For example, the first one, seeing that there's the self lacks any permanent, single and autonomous self, still that will not affect that much. That will not kind of shake the root of grasping at a truly existent I as such. And therefore, in order to get rid of the rest of the grasping at self, we need to get rid of the this grasping at a self, which is perceiving the self to have any independent objective existence whatsoever. And so even within the Madhyamaka system itself, Madhyamaka philosophical schools, there are divisions between these Savatantrikas and Madhyamakas, Prasangikas and so forth. And so the Savatantrika Madhyamakas say that in the factor which actually binds us in samsara is this grasping at the true existence of a self. person, and whereas the grasping at true existence of phenomena as such is not considered to be the root of samsara, but the other one is said to be, and therefore they say that in order to get in order for one to go out of samsara, in other words, reach nirvana or liberation, they say that understanding selflessness of person is enough, and there's no need to understand or gain insight into emptiness as such. But then the philosophical system of Madhyamaka Prasangikas say that it is very imperative for us to realize emptiness, even to reach nirvana within the Shravaka system or the Pratyeka Buddha system. It is necessary for us to realize emptiness. And then in the next, and so the verse number 30 says, so seeing aggregates to be unreal as such, one abandons the grasping of I. By abandoning the grasping of I, aggregates do not rise again. And so, and then verse number 31 through to 34 shows that for us, things do appear to have some kind of existence of, intrinsic, independent, objective existence, whereas there is no such existence at all whatsoever. And so it gives the analogy of a mirror. Relying on a mirror, reflection of one's face is seen. So when for children, when the reflection of one's face appears in the mirror, they think that their face is actually there, and so there is this appearance of the mirror reflection as if it's a face, and whereas it's not. And so similarly, although things do appear to have some kind of true existence, they do not have such a way of existence at all.
Tisituswa nganziyus tisi kasa shimuzin tisi tele nganziyu na yang lete kwapenjige ani le sagres tele yang ni gyayins ta tene yana juni ani tongme moribo ya nishe Tuyukunula, Tekonanila Moriba, Tuyukunula, any Sonamayim Bela Sayaki, Tuyukunulia, Lander Moriba, the Shegiori. Jenny Oda, the any Tekonanila Moriba, Yavaina, any Kandas Subuko Penjigala Sayoris, Teleyan, Telein Kasa Judi. 코아펜식이는 두식이 돼서 아니 규득 남식이든 또 봐자고 다디 라인 야 머리고 던지 살 현실이다 아니 가서 그래 저기 계시 민수 가서 저기 셀레 어디지 전에 에노다 겨울레버리스 람숨 통도 의매바 코웨 진공 개미 진고도 부 편준지 규진이는 코원조르스 다 람숨 세네다 뇽몽보다 레다 계획 근유 숨도 패진이서리 근유 숨세야지 뇽몽비 근유 레지 근유 계획 근유 전에 숨체 드네르 람숨 다 통도 의매바스 다 머리부지에 그두기 그때인데 머리봉감에 방셔배야 땐지 잘신지기 딱한다 가다 깨내고 깨내 내배내고 저거였다 디민수 들을 때네 민수 지지를 봐서 들을 때네 세렌지하로 내가 머리부지하다 세렌지하로 용되게 하리 어떻게 이 땐지 잘지기 에네 간다 가서 주마서 공了야 던지 현실다 자자 동자 치장 문자다 편지 님이 나로래야 다 머리에 군은 랑배 아니 편지 고편지래 편지 님이 찍을다 자자 동자 편지 연구하다 실수였다另外一种来忙过去 다 디디기 아니 그 덴지 머리부 찍다 니만 찍을 때 차먹고 용다 찍이 디디 인도전에 그 덴지 차 찍이 뛰어와다 것이사 디바라데 양 덴지 먹고 지금 고 소용도 다 도우스잖니 다 덴지 인도 개미 콜로 코에 긴고 개미 긴고도 편준기 규전되는 코안주스 편준이야 땡땡했지 남의 머리보다 덴지 방샤에 아들 여월로 풍군되기 야고 가서 우리 그게 머리보다 너무 깨하게 냉게는 just join 있잖아요. 그냥 투베진으로 치고도. 산들이 인도 규전되는 코안주스 다 제대로니 스보 코로 코대야지 다 그 인도 근리인다 젠니 아니 나와도 좀 다디 네가 땡내 네버시다 고요를 진리 인도 되는 장신 네가 더 주숨니도 맞dob치스 진리들보다 스보 코로 코대야 다 진리디 파파파 쩨베이나 디도 상월로 민장 딸 잠시마도 떡배 딱으로마도 개인인데뭐 잠시마도 매정해지기 되는 인도 코파 그 전쟁면에 여나 자나니 고야리 되는 인도 바 딱순 자는 요마이나 당일이 겨와야 말이 셴이 겨와야 말이 니가리 겨와야 말이 주밀이 겨와 가네 다가는 신기 아니 가서 그게 유인원은 막 제윤데 와다 무시 가서 겨와시 다기 현지 니가리 겨와 나 주밀이 겨와서 뒤서는 막 제야로 뭘 제윤도 전에 직도제 레비먼 제윤도 전에 유명견고 다 된데게 다서 제윤도 전에 아니 고니야 견에 받아보시 된데부터 나야 요말 다다 요 마음발에 요말 주스미도 맞도 칠 나 된데 다른 제윤도 다 코보 생정고에 때는 다서부터 니하메딩에 관계 코로에 레드 뉴모스야디 다들잖아 니하메딩에 그다 또 다른 신기 탈바스라는 다 가래 탈병고 뭔지인도잖아 아니 들으시거다 탈도나 심취니들이 심취니 아니 뉴모 방배 아니 제가 개발된 데댕에게 된게 심취니데 타바샤래 타바스로도 치료로 더신소를 찍어 말해 타바스야 돼 랑게 심규 땡게 좀 세베 단 가서 내리 짬이 있는 년지 방배 제가 개발된 데댕 심취니데 타바래 자 되는 인도잖아요 되는지보다 저도 타바디에 레다 뉴모 세베타 레다 뉴모 남도를 더다저저 저번에 똥번 니투 가관지로 소리잖아요 타바디 주니 가는 거 보시기도 와 디참레 요래 자 되는 인도잖아요 다 타바코에 다도서는 니하면 되게 봐 타바 톱지 동니고는 타바 톱고 요래 되는지부터 똥번이 돼야 다도잖아 야 똥번이디 캐시를 샤네 대 인루크의 제베이는 동문이 내용마도 동문이 코라니 하면 되고 자들이 어딘지 인도 가다베 수는 남자가 봐주 쭉 강이나야 다도 저는 이주매다 봐. 야 패널 데딩의 인도 매바 오늘 유루도 가르슬러나 다 민구왕게 해봐도 외매지 도벽도 당가는 소로야 민구왕게 해봐지 때내면 저 전쟁원에 해봐도 나요도 자들이 인도가 대송하리 주숨니도 안 맞을지 난지반에 세번유로스 대저 난지 세네 테네레다 겨와야 이 세루그레스 대저 군제 겨와다 대저 세번이 소나 야단이도 지된다 여민이도 메심소스잖아 어떤 된주고 대코나니 된주고 대코나니 시도 동반이 있으려다 다음에서려다 또 쳐도 와 동반이도 다음에서는 가서 자자 시도 다 된주고 대코나니 있으려다 런시 동외 고된데 때에 따고를 와 슬르드잖아 메타사용도 때에 중그 때에 슬르잖아 샤나 잘래고야 샤나 잘래가 있잖아 때에 장왕 봐 중스잖아 지게 되겠지 저 때에 매봐 다들 고용도 저 진짜 인도 That the dance for Shutaro, by Garo Dambayina, gaining diversity, Dinjung Tekonani, Slaughter in South Chuchari. Tinju, Jordan and Tadoa. My Mammy Bay to you in some mission in Navaja Sadiku to the Jordan's signal Lolia, Darado. Them call and the Tanya to Ranzi of Shisha and Sungiare, that the Digiton Shutako can do any shine Tanya to Ranzi Shigang. Umoba image shine shamado ko tsikora kadu darado geni dibazam ji tinjung chuni sa songdo zade zade zane da ga da tsikdi ne sa shojile sha ngobulu kasu shila batri ngobulu gi tenje de bo jo tene do bani do tene tene da wo de tini ume lamien no chene oda tani se ume tende di so de leudo so de yin kasade 양다 니도 지된라 예매 니도 미심소스 나와다도 모니지 예바에 매 때네 매바에 매바 민야 다요 장게 예바에 인도자네 매바니 동안 미심소스 또 타니 세트 소버리
So verse number 35. In fact, verse number 34, let me just finish. It says that when the exalted Ananda, having comprehended meanings such as this and attained the divine Dharma vision, he reveals this to the bhikshus. So this is actually a reference to certain quotations in the Hinayana Sutras, which says such things as like the form is like a form that appears, that forms on the top, and then the feeling is like a bubble and so forth. And so what this shows is that when one sees dependent origination, one sees the Dharma, and one sees the Dharma also, one sees the Tathagata. So these kind of quotations are referred by this verse. And so what it shows is that things do not have any intrinsic existence. So when seeing Dharma, one sees Tathagata refers to seeing that things do not have any intrinsic or inherent existence. And so to understand the two truths here is very important. And the Buddha gave his Dharma, as Nagarjuna says, the Buddha gave teachings, his teachings based on the two truths, the conventional and the ultimate. And then the next verse, number 34, says, as long as there is grasping of aggregates, so long in view of these there is grasping of I. When there is grasping of I, there are actions. From wherefrom in turn ensue rebirths. And so because of our clinging to or grasping at the aggregates, the psychophysical aggregates, then that gives rise to grasping at a self of a person, a self, and then that in turn causes us to have attachment and anger and so forth, which in turn leads to which actually propels us, creating karma, and which propels us in this samsara. And so within this the causal process, what actually leads us to create karma is ignorance at the causal level, whereas at the causal level the ignorance that actually leads us to create karma is this ignorance about the true reality of how things are. Whereas actually when we create the karma itself, then what comes called actively is the ignorance about the causality, law of causality. And so these two, in other words, one serves as the basis giving rise to the other when we actually create the karmas. And so having created a karma, what happens to us is that we actually propel ourselves into another existence in the next life. life, which actually comes through the help of, once we have created a karma, it is kind of reactivated around the time of death, or through these two links within the 12 links of 12 links of dependent origination, the two links which are grasping or appropriation, grasping and appropriation. And so these two, through these, then we actually take a rebirth and again go into this cycle of existence. And so this is how what is shown here, that we from this karma or action in turn rebirth ensues. And then verse number 36 says, through the three phases of cycle of existence, one revolves like a wheel of fire, without beginning, middle, and end, whilst mutually giving rise to one another. So here, the three phases of cyclic existence refers to these three afflicting factors, which are afflictive emotions, karma, and the rebirth. And so these, through these, what happens is one revolves like a wheel of fire. And so what happens here, so when we go round and round in this cycle of existence, there's no beginning, middle, or end, while we have created one karma which has brought out into one existence. In that very existence, the moment we actually conceive, for example, in a womb, or we take rebirth in a certain existence, then at that very moment, because of our grasping at true existence of the psychophysical aggregates, we again, repeat the same process of creating karma, and then because of which, again, while one cycle of rebirth, or 12 links of 12 links of dependent origination is in work, we still create more of this whole cycle of 12 links of existence. In other words, once you are born, for example, you have created a karma in this life, and which actually is reactivated, revitalized through the grasping and appropriation, or craving and grasping, and then that in turn throws us into an existence. Or in the next existence, as soon as we have the psychophysical aggregates of that existence, we also has this grasping at the psychophysical aggregates, which in turn lead us to create more karma. So in this way, while one cycle is still not completed, we create another cycle. We begin with another cycle. So it could go on and on like that. We may create hundreds or thousands, or even tens of thousands, or 100,000 and so forth of the same and then another cycle of existence. And so this is what is shown here, that there is no beginning, end, and middle, while mutually giving rise to one another. And so this is how it happens. And then verse number 37 shows that things are merely a name, that they are merely designated, and the things are of mere conditionality. And so the verse says, because it is not acquired from self and other, or even in the three times, grasping of I is finally dissipated, and thereafter the actions and rebirth. So, because of our grasping at some kind of true existence of self, we create karma and so forth, and which lead us to this cycle of existence. Whereas if you understand that things do not either have any independence arising from the self, from a self, nor from another, inherently existing another, nor from both, nor, of course, causelessly, then what you understand is that the samsaric beings are merely designated, although we do hold on to some kind of true independent existent I. There is no such a samsaric being who is independently existing, and therefore when you really check and analyze into how you really exist, this ignorance grasps at this kind of a true existence, independent existence, whereas when you really search for that I, what you will find is that it is you lack that kind of I at all, and so you lack that kind of I, and so in order to reach Nirvana, what we need to do is that we need to overcome all these negative emotions, the kleshas, and Nirvana itself is that state wherein you have actually overcome all the delusions, all the negative emotions within yourself, and Nirvana itself is defined as that suchness of the mind itself, which is the free from the suchness of the mind, free from all delusions, all negative emotions, is Nirvana itself. So Nirvana is not something outside of yourself. It is that very empty nature of your mind, the emptiness of your mind when it's free from all delusions. And therefore, Master Nagarjuna also, which we will come later, says that all these fabrications or reifications will dissolve into or within the emptiness. So this is what pointing to the fact that Nirvana is emptiness of the mind, of one's own mind, when it's free from all negative emotions. And then, having said that, of course, we need also to understand that emptiness is also empty of any intrinsic existence. Therefore, from form to omniscience, everything has nothing, no objective existence at all. So understanding the suchness of dependent origination is very important.
미진나라 당한다 용수 미시 장치로서 되게 지구르지 단 다디 된데다 테마디니다 하고도에 아니 저거지 드라마와 아니 상면이 것도 타베체 말이 상면이 안 된 것도 줄베체 아니 그리고 진실 등에다 들바다 믹스는 순고 요소리 냥엔달라 대다군 매버주는 최민직스 상면이 된 것도 제가 내거리야 아니 그리고 진실 되다들 아니 지구지기 말이스 안데 탕돌라네 된데가 상면이 된 것도 사서 너무 지거라 디지 매버 샤발라 디 우모벨룬데 아니 모니지 매버 샤바 라 큐니 지지 지버체스 진 정로기다 넘버 쉐베 균도 타마이메 다가다 더드비지 베지리 넘버 쉐베 균도 타마이메 선냥대 돈을 하면 하는 것도 제가 내걸래 아니 풍부를 한번 뺐다 가서 그래 나사 렌유지 방식으로 풍부 균 체베지리 사미지 풍부도 제니 따들이야 아니 띵고도와 가서 그냥 자주면서 줄이야 아니 이루사지 줄라면은 손야리 머리 파자져서도 사마이를 좀 이지런 신이 류사다 되기 된지기다 간다 가시오래 다 류진도 직송고도가 다디 나 거리야다 들이야 가서 14구 강조해야래 산지기 아니 수구 년龄이 교디 컨디션 거야래서 대한 14구 더 되셔야래 저다 된지지 저서 가다 바르비 아니 그리고 준신 되다 될 지고 맞지 봐 아니 롱들 모니 집에 셔셔 될 지고 야 말이스 탈了다음에 봉부에 계속 타고 된다 다도 봉부 싸와라 니니 큐고 지미가스 탈了다음에 봉부에 가다 가서 로로 샤워는 신기 아니 다도 다와해 가서 스페시 매라차 다가는 신기 풍부 대버집에 된지 봐 신이 유잖아요 다도 풍부 되게는 여보다 나한테디 따방 가네 그냥 상면한테 그분들 학자도 하면서 한데 대한항가 상마도 제 맞아가 더는 셰윤도 아니 상면한테 것도 제 되는 윤주 방사를 제려야 아니 냠샤려야 당네 윤주 방사를 제라 아니야 가자데 된주고 나와 샤인도잖아 아니 학자냐한테 쟤네 상 가를 하기로서는 대한항에 지야지 그래서 고주심부터 왔을 때. 그래서 진짜 인도 타라 다음에 풍부매 계속 타고 텐전데 다도 풍부 싸워는 드니 교구 지미가 냥엔데 뭔가 봐 미나 대면 갈레인스 다 모니기 단 두제로 우리 두마신 지선으로 소원한 신이설에 단 두면체 냥엔데 뭔가 봐 미나 대면 갈레 뭐도 맨제바 세바냥은 다시 자스 다가다 냥을인데 뭐 담바리 삼네 냥데 띵두든지니 뭐 냥대군도 저오냐별로 껴있네 거다 논주지 그래서 대대한다 더 연구도 와 그래서 어디든 인도잖아요 뭐도 맨제바 세바냥은 다시 자스 너나 양자시로는 이게 시버용서 시버니 냥의 시버니 있으니 시버랑 시버가 시니 대통령도 주베 단 내가 지리야 내가 켜봐 지리 아니 냥됐어요 됐어 아니 퍼진 거리네 시신님이 센터 진짜 소용도 와 타라담 공부매 말지 말해 뭐도 맨서 세바냥은 다시자 너나 매버 따와니 레지드 메저버 소나마이 냐소와 텐 로봇다시 소나마이 벨라사나 냐소 기그리스 너나 예버 따와니 레지드 유제바 어니 가다 메유엘라다 지 가서 우리게 어디 지사나사 소나고라도 메유엘라사 드르데디 가다 덴징기 군나는 중부 인도잖아요 여버다원이 레전드고 유저고 선남된로 교도부 양도 다와 시시도스 지진지대be 양도 다와 시기어도 시고 코라 편지고 차디어스 시베 매다 유시지 뒤도 선남 랜데강 대행년로 된로레 텐네 타고 담베시스 다가다 덴진 빵네 아니 미유레도 선남을레다 아니 대주제 인다가다 사야 메모리 다가다 소 코어 편지길래 떼는가 보지 연구에 인도잖아요 tenir 타고 담배시 인다.
일체 고통을 당하게 하는 이 법을 듣고서도 어리석은 자는 심사 없이 무해처를 완전히 알지 못하는 까닭에 두려워하는 것입니다.
So verses 38, verse number 38 says, seeing causes and effects arising as well as ceasing, one in this world ultimately discerns neither existence nor non-existence. And so this is checking about the dependent origination of things, that things do not either have any intrinsic existence, nor that they, when we say that things have no intrinsic existence, that we are denying any existence at all. And so understanding of the dependent origination, suchness of dependent origination, in other words, is very, very crucial, because dependence means, shows that there is nothing exists inherently, whereas arising or origination shows that we are not denying the existence of things. And so this is very clearly also mentioned in the Sfuta Artha of Haribhadra, which is the clear meaning commentary of Haribhadra on Abhisamaya Alankara. And the understanding in this way, the emptiness, to mean that dependent origination is said to be the middle way, as Master Nagarjuna says in the Mula Madhyamaka Karika. And then verse number 39 says, listening to this Dharma that ends all suffering, if one develops unreasonable fear towards what is not frightening, such fear arises only through utter lack of understanding. And then it goes on to say into the next verse, when in Nirvana all these cease, you fear not. Yet, when their non-existence is explained here, why then do you fear? And so this is dealing with the Nirvana without residue. you know, in certain schools of thought, they say that when you attain, when you after having become an arahat, when you die, then nothing whatsoever of you, either nothing of your psychophysical aggregates, even the consciousness remains at all. And so even the consciousness of an arahat goes out of existence completely. And so it is saying that when you do not fear, that when you become nothing, when you say that you become nothing, you don't fear, then why do you have to fear this teaching of emptiness as well? And so in this case now, of course, in this line number 3, it says, yet when the non-existence explained, it said this is explained by the Madhyamakas, who assert that things do not have any intrinsic existence whatsoever. And so when Madhyamakas explain that things do not have any existence, why do you have to fear this? And so with regard to the arahatship, it's sometimes said that in certain other schools who do not assert that after death the arahats turn into nothing, but they still remain in some kind of a mental body, and so that mental body is attained through uncontaminated karma and the ground of what is known as the ground of imprint of the ignorance. And so of course it's quite complicated idea, but when we talk about the bodhisattvas attaining Buddha body in the end, it is more clearly explained in the tantras and Hayas Yoga Tantra, and where it explains very precisely about the substantial course of the form body of a Buddha. And so, and then verse number 41 says, in liberation there is neither self nor aggregates. When liberation is explained as such, why then do you not rejoice in the negation of self and aggregates? So here this is kind of an argument against those, argument in relation to the arahatship or nirvana with residue and nirvana without residue. And so according to the certain lower schools, they say that nirvana with residue means as long as an arahat is still within the psychophysical aggregates, and then there is nirvana with residue. And once they die from there, then the aggregates are also ceased, and therefore there's nirvana without residue. And then according to the Prasankika Madhyamakas, they say that nirvana with residue and nirvana without residue actually has to be understood in terms of within that nirvana that you attain, which is this total elimination of all negative emotions within your mind. When you are totally absorbed in emptiness, your mind is totally absorbed in emptiness, then there is no appearance of any true existence of things at all, and therefore it is called nirvana without residue. Whereas once you come out of that absorption and you see the varieties of things, and then there is an appearance of things as if they have some kind of objective existence, then that is the nirvana of with residue. So it makes real sense when you define nirvana with residue and without residue in this way. And then verse number 42 says, when liberation is not even a non-thing, how can it then be a thing? Know that extinction of conceptualizations of both things and non-things is in fact nirvana. And so nirvana is attained when when you actually get rid of all these grasping at true existence of things completely. And if you actually think that nirvana can have some kind of a true independent existence, that is also wrong. So grasping at nirvana to have some kind of a true existence is also not right. And so this one is saying, as Master Nagarjuna says, that Nirvana is defined as that which is the non-intrinsic existence of samsara. So, which is to say that when you become an arhat, when you realize or reach liberation, your mind is free from all grasping, all this called grasping a true existence, and that is the state of nirvana. And then
tene takwa slawina ta duje tinju slawna duje cha che la duje tinju slawna duje cha tene takwa tinju slawna duje ma je tadal ya kyamlo sto ga 자상가 깨와 주도 제타면서니 duje tenji ta duje tinjungi 균적이 된 뜻이야 다양 줄이야 지지기 주도 시지기 주시샤도가 자상고 시지기 주스는 거다 강한 때네 거다 대표게 시험셔 딱봐 들자면도 개와 주도 제타면 딱한다 동번이 있어야 돼 가야 매배 돼 말이스 동번이 있어야 돼 때는 딱 배터리 때는 좀 때는 딱 배터리 진짜인데 매번 말이스 매번 일은 돼 매번 일은 돼봐인스 뭐고 주도 제통해스 여번 이동 캐멜레스 뭐니지야나 뭐 줘봐 뭐 줘봐인데 샤노 라레고 말봐 샤노 라말레나 에네 고 가야 용 말이스 단도 내야 용 그러와스 좋아 사티디 이르잖아 고 야나 단도 메고래 야나 단도 여고래 고 뭐요 그러다 그 샤나 때베이나 고 떠서 되기 규례 왕기 고 요원도 되거라 때문에 그게 집에나 고 요원도 말아 사티디 이르잖아 고고 주도 제정에 매번 여번이 동안 캐멜레스 나르기보다 현지기 주민 전도 주민 주메도스 그래서 나르기보다 단디샤 지금 다음에 다기를 자주 오므로 섬기 존재 정신 지고 전에 레뷰 정신 강의 뭐 교육 내고로 여대버 전에 근데 이제는 레뷰 계전 레뷰 때 기지기 교육 내고네 데모 뭐 메시지도 여대버스 루즈잖아요 디시그면도 섬기 나르기보다 다양 현지기에서는 다 현진 과야를 된 줘야도가 현세야디 지금 되는 현상으로 자장가 뒤는거라 저부터로 자장가 뒤에 지를 되는 현도 샤워래 샤면도 사실은 인도산에 나기보다 현지기 안도 자시로 쓰들이 가서 뭐 남지 정신이 깨어서라 여머이 다 뭐고 여면은 아니 신이가 가르쳐줬어. 다양 뭐보는 정신이 뭐보는 깨는 소리 해마이 아니 다른 뭐 여면은教育뭐 넣었어. 현지세한테 현대教니조도는 현지셔거려 봐. 저장아教과야지 현 과야지 이거 니거인 것도. 저장도 뒤만 상당나. 나기보다 현지기 주민 전도 주민도 다다 양다 니도나 교황으로도 맞아치스 다제다네 니주여도 지다 다 줄이 계스로도 다를 기버를 샬리 기버서 다제다나 냐베다지 저부께서야데 저부 여버시 기버를 매버시 기버를 다제다나 냐베다지 진짜 인도 다당스 아니 다네 미니버 이르잖아 고 양다고니도 좀 해봐 들이 뭐 양다고니도 뭐니 좀 해봐 양다니도나 교황으로도 맞아치스 다와나 견제 매버를 했었나 견제 매버 말이스 견제 야리스 견제 모순스네 아니 견제 모순으로지도 나보다 고순스 셰기야리 자 오늘 근제랬었나 수는 남지 바지 처리디 매버 말이 야리 팬인지기야리 그래서 안다 존드베 지송이야리 아니 Neludalas, Neludala, Mayame, Lagwayame, Segwe Chawayame. Tadanaya, Lagwa Meljuna, Sigwele, Sona Dervata, Penudicor, Yarvata. Penudri Yamarson, the Muslim Yamarvata. Chazanga, Yarva. That Yaris learning because you said Papa Zari in a Chinese. Chazanga, Mingwang Yavajimadon, Drosachin with the Tagishatari, or the Nayendu, Dune Shavaris, Diuben and Dijuber, Rimbuyon Tongshin, Digiben, the Diuben and Dijung, Mari, Diuben and Dijuber, Rimbuyon Tongshin said, the Tenatache. Digiben and Digiper, Marmiju version said, Ten and Juma, Ten and Kivatche, Dijuni with Sunwa. That day, the Lobokamala Chile, any Korangi King, Kenji was there, Sashing Devenalia, the Savashusto. Ten Jume, Tenju, Shevekone, Montuya. Ten a Takwe, Tenju Shevekone, Nelituya, Sundua. Just a sergeant of the church, but the Manila Yanda ten, just Sunshageta, Casamari, Mari, Kujishin, Sherbuchi, Kujishini Kazaba, Tenjil something juk, Sen Sunshako. That Tenjil Nisha. And you want to do it through the Zambe, Jumden Leisha Samar law, Leisha Tenejume, Tenjungutanema, Sondage. Tenshisuya, Tenjungu Tegola, Tenjungi, that was already. Tenjugu Tenjigton Sungyarva, Tabashisonati. Tenjala Juni, the Tagaton Sungtua. That then, Tarwatuya, and a ten and Tag with Tenjung, and a Shevekon and Nelituya, Sav Shadow, Lokamalashi Sonala. That Lokamalashi to Koran King, and the Kajishi also, Tanya Duran, the Shanghai Chagiari, Doti Gondri, Nedung Dolias, Shigiari. Nelu Tamagan did the Tempicavaya, she the Umo Gene without the Tarto. Some maturity, some maturity. So Digiban and Digiber, Mamiju versionos. Zuguman Tony, Rango Lemons. Da Penon Zugusubuti, those Zugutima de Zumbure Tumures Lona, Shatamidova. Zugudilana, Zumbu. Zugudilana, Tung. Chazanga Tigana, Ringdung, Tushan, Titundu Risati, Shawan, Kwana Drumado, Rawang Drumdua. So did he do that? Is a taste chamber. Kanda Kane, Pensu Turn Shayachimado, Demegi, doing a cheer better. That the Baba pass sometimes, that means the Shakwala Deva, that they can't protect it. Chazanga Tenjung Sadlea, Junja Tenjung Chick, Chalatak with Tenjung Chick, then attack with Tenjung Chick, Tenjusum can't protect it. Chashal turn a Tawa Sag Tenju, and you do Yari. That the Shimon to Metaba, Minja, Tayo Sag Tenju D, the Tanya to Ransom Mishibi. Any Umuba. That because Umukasoto, that Ransom Mishibati. The two may be quarter Risha. Didn't that don't need Coach Cha, some Koreana, then Zig make it Sawan Shiktaji. They may make it hard to do. Rangiv down only, turned up on only Mujus loved you. Only Jewish year, there were none of the non-degaris. And the Gazette of one should announce. But the Gazette of one should announce. Sontoa. Tanya Durazim, she with the Gazette of one should announce, and that make the Shikto. Kavashush to did it. What did it say? So Zumbumena, Tony, Rangamore, Lemons, Yumin, Ranchi, Lemon, Chir, Marmin Juma, maybe Chir, Virgin Juma, Mebashin, Tether, Junde, Ketonshin. Jidin didn't Shishindu, Jolly Juma, Karang Bears, that Junde Musmazu Nunguyari, Numi to Yari, Junde Ketonsins, Junde Numi to Yabatigi, Turba Drumudua. Kangan Jella Raleva, Tedranshi Kidunsa, the Kangan Jella Raleva Yena, Shanla Turba. Shanla Turba Yena, rāwāṅ dhūmiḍuwa. Tā rāwāṅ mēbachi, tā chāchī chīngi dī kanta shāwasla na mīngyā tāyū zāngwāṅ rōgukduwa. Sācī nī yīndu, tētā gyōndē gyēdōng jīdīn dīni chīshindu, zhēli chūngwa kēlāng bē, zhēbā tōqtā zāng, mīngyā tāyū zāng rēs, zhēli chūngwa kēlāng bē, kēlāng nē, mēba yīdu kēmbēnēs. Wā dēnī rī, gōpa zhēli mā chūngwa yāngdā chīshin nī gyūba kēlēng, yōba nī mīngyūs. Tā, tāqdān zēni, tēn tāmbar, 가서 더 먹고 아니 더 먹고 가서 다들 전에 니야 요 말이잖아 뭐니 주 고기 요래 뭐도 이거다 저발에 뭐 좋아 저발에 뭐 좋아 양다 지신이 요거 캘래 저다 민자 따유 정도 여버지 캘라 인도잖아 모니기 아니 여버 니도 민주로 살아. 대 캘리 여버 니 민주. 대나 니미 때문에 다 땅다도 찬다 니를 믿음버디 좋다 그랬지. 야.
46번 보시면 원인이 수반되어 태어남은 생을 봄으로 문을 넘어진다는 원인과 조건에 의해서 결과가 발생을 합니다.
So from verse number 46, it says in verse number 46, seeing production as having causes, one goes beyond nihilism. Seeing cessation as having causes, one no longer asserts existentialism. So before that, what is shown is in verse number 43 to 45 shows that we create karmas which even cause us to be virtuous karmas, which cause us to still bind us in samsara, and therefore these kind of karmas, virtuous karmas, are termed as wrong. It says false view, but although it's within the context of the mundane level, it is a right kind of view that leads us to create a karma for higher rebirths and so forth. But because of holding on to some kind of a true existence in things, and because it binds us, this kind of karma binds us in samsara, it is called false view. And then verse number 46 shows that causes and conditions, in other words, dependence in terms of causes and conditions, which is dependence in terms of causality, and then also dependence in terms of designation, how things are designated. And therefore, between these two, the first one covers only those things which come through causes and conditions. In other words, which are have to do with cause and effect, and whereas dependence by designation encompasses everything, including the causality itself. And then with regard to the cause itself, there is a cause which is actually a factor which gives rise to an effect, and also a cause which actually leads us to understanding how things really are, which is to say that things are dependent, therefore we can see that things do not have any intrinsic existence, and therefore empty of any intrinsic existence. And therefore when we talk about emptiness, the meaning of emptiness is not saying that things do not exist at all, but what we are saying is that things do not have any intrinsic or independent objective existence. But because things are designated, emptiness means that things are designated by way of dependent by way of designation. Therefore, we can see that things do exist because they are dependent. And then next verse 47 says something formally or simultaneously produced is not a cause, and ultimately there is no cause, because such production is not known either conventionally or ultimately. And so this is talk about called the independently existent other. And so when we talk about our self and others, me and others and so forth, actually what we see is that something that we refer to as an other is called posited in relation to something else. And so even this is true even in the case of causes as well, that you call something a cause because of something that it gives rise to, which comes in the future after it, and therefore a cause is also relative. And so Master Nagarjuna says that the production from self, other and so forth do not exist, and which means that inherently existing self and others do not have any existence, and therefore if there is no self, an entity, then how can there be an entity which is another? And and then in this verse, in line number 3, it says that because such production is not known either conventionally or ultimately, what this shows is that although we can talk about causes and conditions giving rise to their effects and so forth, but they have to be understood only in terms of how they are designated. Because if we really search for, if we kind of assert that there is an intrinsically or independently existing cause which gives rise to an effect, then we have to be able to find it when we actually search for that cause, whereas it cannot be found. Therefore, it's merely designated. And cause and effect do not have any kind of any intrinsic existence at all. And whereas it's not denying the existence of cause and effect as such, but that things do not have any intrinsic existence in reality, because although things come through causes and conditions and they are designated by and so forth, but in reality, nothing actually exists inherently. And so, although that is the case, Master Dromtönpa, Tibetan Master Dromtönpa, has said that although in ultimate sense the fire, the hand, and the burning, the action of burning do not have any intrinsic existence, yet in conventional terms, if you actually put your hand in the fire, it'll burn. And so what this shows is that although things do not have any, we deny any inherent independent existence in things, this is, and we say things are empty, yet it is not a denial of the factual things which actually are there in convention. And so, and then so in this way, what it shows is that conventionally things exist, but in the ultimate sense, when you do search for the entities, then you cannot find it at all. And then verse number 48 shows, 48 says, because this exists, that ensues. Because just when there are, just as when there is long, there is short. Because there is this arises, that arises. Just as when there is flame, there is light. And so the first two lines show, so here what is shown is basically that things are dependent, that they are designated and in relation or in dependence on other factors. And therefore the first two lines show the dependence by way of designation, whereas the last two lines, line 3 and 4, shows a dependence in terms of causality. And so understanding these two are very crucial, because Kamalashila, in his commentary to the Chandarakshita's Tattva Samgraha, which is a text on logic and epistemology, Kamalashila, who was a disciple of Chandarakshita, has commented on his teacher's text. And this commentary, Tattva Samgraha Panjika, in it he says clearly that through the understanding of law of causality, we actually create causes. We can create causes for rebirth in higher existences, fortunate rebirth, whereas through the understanding of dependent origination in terms of how things are designated, then we actually can create causes for liberation, nirvana. And this is what echoes in Master Tsongkhapa's also writing in his praise to the Buddha for teaching relativity. And Shantarakshita and Kamalasila were two great masters Indian masters who came to Tibet in the 8th century, were the followers of Savatantrika Madhyamaka's philosophical school, which was in fact founded by Shantarakshita, wherein they assert that things do have some objective existence, and therefore because of that they say that to the sensory perceptions the independent or the true existence do not appear, whereas in the case of the Madhyamaka school, the sub-school which is Prasangika Madhyamaka, who deny any objective existence of things, they say that there is an appearance to the sensory perceptions of independent existence of things, and so there is a difference between these two schools in asserting objective existence or not. And
유식이나 자립론 중에서 얘기하는 부분에 의한 어떤 연기, 부분에 의해서 그 어떤 전체를 얘기를 할 때 그 일부분.
And then so the first.
적인 것은 중간파에서 얘기하는 상호 의존적 연기가 어떤 공적.
And then with regard to how things are related, we can use our fingers. Take example. For example, if we put up called 3 fingers, the 3 last fingers in our right hand, the middle one, which is the ring finger, is called taller or longer compared to the small finger. Whereas if you put it together beside the middle finger, it is shorter. And therefore, whether we call this ring finger short or long is also relative. And so in other words, now we can understand that nothing whatsoever can escape relativity, that things are related to one another or relative to another thing, and therefore through the understanding of causal dependence and within the understanding in terms of causality, and there is also with regard to dependence of things, there is dependence in terms of causality, there's dependence in terms of how a part is related to its whole, and how a whole is related to its parts, which is in fact asserted by the Savatantrika Madhyamakas as well. And then finally, the subtlest form of designation or dependence is this dependence in terms of designation, how things are merely designated, how they are merely in name, that there is nothing whatsoever that exists objectively. And so when you really get into this understanding of how things are merely designated, or how things do not have any objective existence, then you'll be able to actually deconstruct or you'll be able to destroy all objectification in things. Whereas for the as long as you assert objective existence, you cannot destroy objectification in things as well. And then the next verse number 40, called 50, says that seeing effects arising from causes, one considers so this is about the explanation of verse number 49, and then 50 says seeing effects arising from causes, one considers the world as arising through fabrications. One thus does not assert non-existence. And so
이제 너가 돼. 되나니 님이 때 절제다. 들어봐. 틀에는 통해서 냐와는 싸워 통스. 미국에도 추이는 냐와는 지미도. 지도 정원은 지진진의 양도통. 태서년은 미통 참여 미주신. 지도 미주신다와 추면 돈도 뭐에 버티신 풍부 다한다와 대다 다음에 돈도 민 미줄라는 디슈시 삼대 되는 송알에 개디 추티 매도신 ዝ버텐 르마니 디시 미규다 원지된 예장 매바시 ዝ버텐 마보요는 매출로 쓰네 매바바는 년도도 예바바는 전도도 양다지 용시 일은 매된 타원죠 다되게 님부대 아니 낭동 개면사들이샤 최식 그게 편연증의 최식도가 그러다 전제 편연증의 최식이 정신 가려 봐봐 자외에는 얘기 못 되지. 저정가다 전제 인도 파 편의 여대부 되기 전에 그 여등에 나왔던 밀로인등에 나왔던 밀로인등에 최 대가를 한 봐봐 원이 주요면다 유진의 주요 봐봐 유진 주요면서 왔다 그래 그 뭐도 가래 그 뭐더라 안 정신도 가려 봐봐 자가시면은 얘기 못 되지. 서진제 인도 낭신도 똥신도 낭 어디 디mer 낭동 개매사디 안다 디저레 디저 좀좀 근데 동구치 어디나리야 신콘데션은 말려봐 당랑 그 심지 딱 봐서 선태야 당나 장가트 내루지 뭐 에마고 령가라 춘진 된것인 인랑스미 영 낭으로 뭐 녀나가 저거 말려도 나게면 나게 나저 시지야 뭐도 좀부지 낭자가 규매 때문에 통스 다 수저로 써봐 나야 여대바 뒤에 낭신도 동바 원이 좀 해도 싫어했어 그래서 낭자가 규매 때문에 얘나야 낭종 작성 되게 되네 편연제 되네 균제기 된주 되게 있잖아요 낭자가 규매 때문에 냠가와 낭동 소주디 루미지 되는 게 뭐니 세송샤디 차상 차요 장주가 이렇게 캠도 어제를 저 가다이네 낭동 개매도 숨고도 뒤지게 다른 이유도 그러셔 저 다들 전에 많이 되게 야마스 레벨이나 이거 찾아도 그랬어 봐 다들 전에 많이 되게 뭐니지 못 주버지 뭐도 매백해 좀 말했어 가르스는 유단고 마다 맞으면 가는 지금 차별권에 이어버리지 어때래 여보고 뭐니 여보지나 오늘 뭐니 주버디 주여면 바지게 전에 뭐니 주버디 많이도 리베 캐버리 뭐니 주여나 리베 토도제베 지식이 니고 발라 많이 베지 지식이 캐버리 지금 뭐니 주버디 캐버리 마도 미국왕의 여성도 캐버 말이다 저상 가가지고 뭐니 주버 캐버 니기 민상고 여버도 관리용도 저들이 있는 어다이니 가다 낭동 개매리스 디소래 조들이셔 네 다 주시
멀리서 52번부터 있습니다. 멀리서 보이는 형상이 가까이 있는 이들에게 분명히 보이고 신지류가 물이라면 가까이
So verse number 50 shows that of course causality is something undeniable to us because things do come through causes and conditions, and therefore what it shows is that things are dependently arisen, dependently originated or existent, and therefore whatever Master Nagarjuna says that whatever depends on conditions and causes and conditions no, the Master Tsongkhapa says whatever depends on causes and conditions, they are said to be empty of any intrinsic existence. And what more amazing instruction than this can be found? And then verse number 51 also shows that things do not have any intrinsic objective existence, and therefore they are free from any fabrication. And so when you understand that things are dependent originated, yet they are devoid of any intrinsic existence, you can actually overcome any kind of objectification, and therefore you will be free from both the nihilism and permanence, holding on to permanence in things. And then verse number 52 shows so verse number 51 says, refuting whatever arises through fabrication to be existing in reality. One does not assert existence. Not relying on duality, one finds liberation. And then verse number 52 shows the consistency between appearance and emptiness. And so the consistency between these two means that, because things do affect us, we can relate to causes and conditions, and therefore when we do something, it affects, we experience the results and so forth. Therefore, the dependence of causality is something undeniable and unfailing. And whereas when we say, if we say that things have some intrinsic existence, we should be able to find them when we search for that entity, whereas it cannot be found. But not being able to find when we search for the entity and in itself doesn't mean that the thing does not exist at all. And therefore, while things are dependently originated, they lack any intrinsic existence. And therefore, and vice versa, while things are empty, they do have appearances, appearances in terms of conventional things. Whereas if you really try to look for that, you cannot find. Just as the seventh Dalai Lama also has said, that things are like illusion.
여바 지치 밀레스 강다 20 메니에도 담이 차셔서 우모베 아니 모니지 뭐도 쓰고를 뭐도 때네 뭐도 쓰고 말했어 뭐도 쓰고 말했어 강다 20 메니에도 담이 차신 미줄라스 미주바 정주 땡치 선매라 대다치들 매버셔스 와다 정주 선배 저소를 돈이 또 되게 돈이 매버 요등에 다 동번이 남샤 샤샹에 되게 와다 때는다고 인도도 패널지기도 왔어 아니 교진기 자치기도 왔어 근데 인도 다 두상불을 거래 중년바 털거렸으네 그 추녀번이야지 땡들 동리기가 크제 쳐서게 땡들은 예번이 대속을 렌저송야 숙성도 돼야지 용기하래 어디 되지 고거래 다 레르와 가다 땡들 동리를 정신 그래서 오니 유튜브 동원이 고야고 차바이나 땡들 뚜루로 고아차 디차나 균제기 고아디 하고 차 디쳐도 땡신 남샤려 땡는 예번이 돼야지 시 가서스네 좀 내가 수버리 사주다 다 좀 내가 수버리다 코랑게 캔 사서를 상을 리고 이렇게 가서스네 게디스다 좀 소화스케면도 좀 내가 수버리 다베제 인지리스다 다 디쳐네 들어 가서 철에도 가사를 때마다 그래서 좀 내가 뜬시 사서야 돼 가사를 믿는 철에도 철에 책을 믿는 터는데 된대야 장들을 믿는 내들을 내도야 남실을 믿는 예실 뜬시네 들을 정도 와 그래서 좀 그게 러이베 그래서 로서 무슨 롱 장소에 가서 찍고 롱 들여다 그래서 야 결혼다고 캐는지 그래서 롱 장소에 어디 좀 되게 결혼다고 캐는지 세세다를 스테이션도 레코다라 나이가 라원 차이 규칙 민제 송샤디 먼저 다시 적어라 좀 되게 가리네 다시 적어라 스노 루루야 세계 좀 되게 그걸 다시 나네 오 다딩에 되는 도레스 어디 장도근 도레스 너도 공주도 장도근 도레 다 집에 가는 지금 말했을 수도 가서 제다 다래 가서 저거지 너도 공주도 아니 대코는 터도 숨겨 말했어 드린데 장도근 도레스 그다 다 장이 제자를 체인도 딩일 적으로 와 자상가 뒤저저 중에 제시기 더 식디에 전전대 뭔가들이 쪼신 때는兄弟 내등인도 전전대 뭔가들이 쪼신 때 뭐인비兄弟이니 가서 장등인도 산 너도 건지기 뭐님이서 숨숨을 때 전전대 뭐 터도 차요 말 사진이 장등도 있어 송셔 좀 더 될까 까이면 어서 진짜 그런 게 전당에다 봐도 저 가수를 그게 저스는 나베 그도 전당에다 봐겠니 다마를 됐다 너디 빼데 애니베 다치지면 캐나는 저기스 너신다 이래는 게 되는 더 말이지 들어서요 또 진짜 좀 전에 고랑이 들어 숨으려디 뒤까시도 나가는 신경 가려 한다디 랑거시분데 나를 시바 초계시가 남시 초계 근신 남시 송도가 디디 까인 것도 아 사들이 이제 전에 디디 리버든 로데게 와래 어디 로다 된지 어디 damage 어떤 된지샤 자자치 때문에 버셔스 그래
58번 보시면 다른 것을 여실히 알므로써 유물을 인정하지 않는다는 그런 까닭에 유론자가 된다고 한다면 어째서 유론자가 작용되지 않는가 이 부분은
all the experiences that we have, sensory experiences and so forth, when you realize emptiness, you see that the experiences kind of dissolve within that, and therefore, like dissipation of this cloud in this autumn space. And therefore, he says that I see this great show of the illusory nature of things that appear to me. And then he also, what this means is that there is this causality, law of causality, which things, whereby we say that things do exist. And then he also says that he sees this great show of dependent origination, how it is infallible and undeceiving. And although things cannot be found under analysis, yet we cannot say that if we say that they do not exist at all, it's nihilism. Whereas if you assert that things have any intrinsic existence, that is falling into the permanence. And so we avoid both of these through the understanding of emptiness, that things are dependently originated. And then verse number, so Rizal is read till verse number 57, and then made that comment. And then verse number 58 through to 60 shows that if you understand emptiness well, what you understand is that things are dependently originated. Therefore, when in dependence, because things are dependent, therefore causality is also feasible. And therefore, understanding of emptiness itself, actually, instead of denying or instead of nullifying the existence of things, it actually complements the understanding of causality, law of causality itself. Therefore, if you understand emptiness well, what you understand is that things are dependently existent. Things are relative. And if you understand that, then of course it will lead you to understand that the causality is feasible, because things are related. Therefore, effects can give rise to effects. And therefore, when you understand causality well, then you can also see that the Four Noble Truths, the teaching on the Four Noble Truths, is also feasible. And therefore, otherwise, without understanding emptiness well, and what you can say is, oh, emptiness is something really maybe wonderful teaching, but I really don't understand. Buddha may have taught it, but I don't really understand it. Anyway, I still will keep my faith in the Buddha, and without really understanding the teaching of the Buddha. And that's not how we should go about with the teaching of the Buddha. And within the teaching of the Buddha also we have, there are those teachings which are called definitive and provisional. As in Sutra, it is said that do not rely on the person, the four reliances, whereby the Buddha says, do not rely on the person, but on the teaching. But do not rely on within the teaching, do not rely on the words, but on the meaning. And within the meaning, do not rely on the provisional or interpretable meanings, but rely on the definitive meanings. And within that, rely not on the intellectual, mere intellectual, superficial understanding, but rely on the experiential, wisdom knowledge of the teachings. So in this way, we also have to make differentiation between the teachings, the definitive and the provisional teachings, just as Master Nagarjuna himself and others have done, other great masters have done. And these are also based on Buddha's own statement, where he says, "O bhikshus and scholars, Just as a gold is tested by the goldsmith by rubbing, cutting, burning, likewise you should examine my teaching and then accept it, but not because you have devotion to me, out of your devotion to me. And so Buddha clearly tells us to examine and check his teaching and not just take it on for granted, that because it is taught by him that we should accept it. It's that not what the Buddha tells us. And therefore Master Nagarjuna and other masters have also done that, and they have made the distinction between definitive and provisional teachings and sutras within the words of the Buddha. And therefore, according to the highest school of Madhyamaka, it is said that those sutras which teach as its main subject matter, or primarily and explicitly the emptiness, ultimate reality, those are definitive, and then those which teach the conventional things and as its main content or subject matter are interpretable ones. And this is also the case with Sandini Mochana Sutra and Langar Avatara Sutra.
Manati. Teja Sanja Namjini, Dabachimi Yumel and Daba Samushisha, Chuki Kuba in Shitis. Tam the Mudigweda Mudivision Shrat the Dua, Limpusara Dua. And you did handy, we share shitty. But Nalinde Cabazu, but show Chigia, Nangbet Saman Shunda, Chicken Nangbet Turku Shunda, show Chigia. Da yarje yos lo tsuri 가르서는 고불루루기 다 튜냠체니다 아얀다와 아니 산제자 되네마 체네 아니 가사조디 로벨랭데다 아니 되네마신다 시워서다 지금 다 아니 시워라도 시드즈제니 가다 뚝스테베이나 무디비 캐바 시워도 좋네 디게 애네 버게 낭외숑네 송셔부터려 각주로 도스 다 용두자네 애네 디한 대바 잡아나네 대바 애네 세샤나 도스나네 야제신다지 근데 좀 전에 송셔베다 가데나로리아 베라도 도도 공지도 수두직 매베이나 애네 시징이 숑네 송셔다가 장장설시 다들 맨저한테 송체 유두자네 야한테 삼동야 잡아지아가 리거로다 저서 인지케이션 마순네 challenge where there is a challenge more possibility further development 사실은 인도 무디를 캐와도 시라 캐와쳐 버려셔 이리 다 남지도 날 때에는 신경이 좀 무디인데 왜 나는 신경 오면 주고도 날도가 아니 디한테 주고지 더 쉽게 나래 무디도 먹고 싶고요 이리 바 세션 나게 각사 나게 정도 되고 사실은 인도 어디 가서 전에 디디기 아니 간다 다음에 왔다 전에 송기야 말 사모로 지금 가서 오지 더지랑 다디 더좀더 싸워야 되고 봐 스커스 셔들이 어딘지 추기 크반다 좀 전에 소모 동문이 다왔다 셔바디 추기 크바디 투모이 버리스 시바티스 다데네 신년 롬의 원매진 계지장의 면에봐 투숨 대다 지된니 대도전도 지요담스 강시 네가 양다도 네가 살아서 관대니면로 관대니잖아 강시 네가 양다도 로도 온다 내면봐 디신지된 어디리샤 디신지된 양인데 전도 개발을 지도부 내가 매칠 말 전도 개발을 지도부 저는 어디 되게 dimda 다 지르긴 아주 투숨 사야돼 다 투숨 그냥 투숨 지르고 그러셔야네 다 투숨이 여러 번 가서 대바 다다와 몽보세 어디 영자를 보다 아니 대바 쳐야도가 몽보래는 아주 철시로 그 지고보다 안 대망 지식시 다다와서지 여러분다. 또 딱두지 않으다. 딱두지 않아 다다와니 하겠노. 당연히야. 그러나 century 셔도 millennium 셔도 그냥 로동자지 다다의 millennium, 대의 millennium, 마음의 millennium. 다들 century, 대의 century, 다다의 century, 마음의 century. 다들 맞잖아. decade와 되는 맞지위는 아니 로 맞지야. 로준단 말이야. 로지야. 아니 나와지야. 아니 든자지야. 샤지야. 아니 추주지야. 깔마지야. 깔자지야 제외이나 깔치 연체된 대화체. 깔치 면제된 마음보체. 다다오면 돼. 다다와 모니 유튜브에 있는 빼나 드린 게 님은 다다와 지금 모니 유튜브였나? 아니 드린 게 뒤집고 걸어라. 아니 쇼가게 대봐. 님고 다다와 치주 마음 걸 러시 말아. 들럽도도 와. 봐. 다다와 들어 슬라베이나 들어 로 다다와 용서로 다다와 쓰고 싶나? 다다와 니를 대망 지신 말아. 이 상황을 봐. 똑딱 잠만하면 돼 봐. 딱왜 되게 좋아지고 그러다. 편연적이도 와. 견사시도 와. 선생님 인도자네. 다다와 매나 에네 강을 떠는 내 마음을 샤고 그러면 돼. 저 어디 시기야. 근데 인도자 셈도 집이나 셈 대베셈 다다베셈 마음베셈 다다베셈 저베이는 냐케는 되지. 그래서 강을 떠는 나야가 풍부 쪼디 시와 들어보다. 시베나네 공연 시바다 이지 시바 이베나네 이지 시바 들어와. 다 이지 시바를 두숨 첸도 상담이나 자원이 샤면 되지. 엔다가는 신가가 루네 시바 차라마 셔인 거로. 라고 시바디 마 템제. 안데 차와 신도 차여가는 말래네. 터도 외세보든 좋아래. 외세대 강사라고 좀 때문에 거야. 외생 가야도 가. 외생 건도 줘야 돼. 외생 가야도 가. 강사 건도 줘야 돼. 강사 가야 셔야 돼. 세상가 파워 누구자 있는잖아요. 와다이네 강사성에 배 나서야 지금 누구 쓰시다. 저 전에는 매들지 되고 리도. 맞네. 맞아 나가 슝나로 지금 동바지도 요새야. 즉 남태배 그돌라. 인심이지 동의다 꼼꼼하래. 신타가스 지금 측전도 성점마도 가게야 말이. 아니 저 하행 아게도 사람들 그제체 저기 등지 때로라고 냐가야다. 등지기 샴들라고 냐가야래. 아니 순고공 배 쉬우체 아니 배 시계 왕라게 배 미국 지전에 랑진지기 샴들 두고야래. 냐가셔야 저태. 야고 좀 좋나? 뭐냐 전에 상하가 냠네 서울사래지 서울 좋아라. 어다 돌랑게 청주선도 돈이 따위 마텐주나 인 상하서 쳐야. 되면은 다 들리지. 아니 아주 칸에다는 남배 상하래서 나와서 뭐도 되지다. 모두가 상하다. 지고 쳐하는 거야 다네. 좋아야. 딜 모두가 상하냐면은 아트마스 다한테 도와줘 싸운다. 다 뒤배다. 근데 끊지 잡아보다 쉬우지 세트 싸운다 하셔도 야야야 소쳐거든데. 그래서 디디디 안데 디디다. 네. 끼지잖아. 맨내가 투숨 대다 지된이 다르도 지어담스. kanji 다든 지수. 디지 지된 양에도 전도 개버려 치다고. 다든에 never mention 겨와당스. 다지상가 견가 내송사데 never 지연이. 아니 겨와당 가봐. 다 저라마에 가 투숨 제루스 시고래라. 나가다 생이께 소시스니. 게 네. 게 아니 직 생이께서 시시도 그래서 그 내가 직다 되고 그 속도 쉬고 just 싸움던 게 있는잖아요. 무슨 제도시다 셔야 되스래. 다 너들이 싫은 타다이 비켜서도 되디 그게 그 모니 좀 찍으라 싸움 쉬었다. 다 됐은 거도. 그래서 니네 인도 다 가다 깨가내서 써야지. 내가 자는 야면도 겨어디 자는 야면도 가고디 자는 야면도 또 가고 연다 님이나 겨어자는 내가 가고도 가르치겠어. 네, 들으시죠. 개도 따도 주는니 다 내가 겁리 끼지 집에 있는 따고 내가서 그걸 샤도 뭐 개도 따도 주는니 지들 끼지 뭐 있는 끼지마 그래서 되면도 모티브인데 봐 그래서 모티브 치라면도 봐 그거 요소리 개도 주면은 전도 신이 갈란줄 딱과 그다 düzen 딱과신 되네 어디 뒤숨시 참말로 숨시 뒤치고 그랬습니다 셔야지 무지시라고 해 내가 저 심사고 내면신다 전에 와다 내가 기디시믹시 셔야지 모티브 뭐마도 매번 인도산에 가서 모티브를 아니 가버로 되지 찰레를 제가 저거랬어. 뭐지 뭔가 마실래요? 카페신 써야 손을 리거다 세디. 그래서 그러면서 그래서 우모다서 당근서 아니 랭되게 배 상제장게 태워되게 고모 말을 버렸지. 남지 시기 하랬어. 랭den게 너한테 제시 마고 버렸으니 배 그러베 그 유당 같이 거래. 랭den가 뭐 패배이나 까나라 쓰세요. 기그다 쓰지. 저서 어디를 더 다가다게는 모티브도 코리아 야고라 메신다. 저선가 이유도 측이 되는 데서 düzen 딱와 내가 인도잖아요. 시들끼리 뭐인 개인 주어면은 돈도 신이 갈란 줄. 초아지 가는 다대도 세배 계신 줄잖아. 민저원이 매미칠 되는 네가 링된 민스다 가다 지 düzen 딱보시는 주어면은 düzenli 주드들이 요도식 말와스. 배는 류디 샤셨나? düzenli 주어래. düzen 딱과래. 얘는 류 요도식 말했어. 그래서 통도 왔어. 다치 에너지 치 가서 치 가서 단 교르자 치 민주로서 샤워 주네. 마대용 거지. 뒤로 숨겨야 돼. 계지는 질미질 님과 다 칼라시. 계지모이는 뒤니버 일부 강보 매버차베이는 아니 님과 다 칼라시. 댄실 계지모이는 님과 다 칼라시. 시들 계지 타여봐. 대시 통모 유다고 대저 계지 숨다시 지진 계지 내버민 통모 유다 타마야 계지 신도 삼잖아. 통모 유다 타마니 랑신래게 뭐이노. 타대 초시 지구민 처음에 받는 가양매 지금에 받는 도마당 예바 매방매 시과하는 년부이 예바 유인이 매버린 줄잖아. 예바 시브 뭐인지 지구하면 년부 치던 줄. 디진양에 내가 인지된 돈도 드리는 줄. 전다 디디기 가다 düzen 딱원 되베다 난게 디를 숨겨야래. 다들 마치니 지든 타나 대남시 쉬는 자와 미송쇼. 그지다다 세베 삼유체 뉴민돌을 미송 디니시는 캐는 군기 탐제 캠버시. 대들은 예벌을 내고 있지 사무 용수 재미진 내미 반에 조산제 탐제 시본 남기수 내미 취지 잡아이 겨울날은 건 것이 여도 매를 만들어 미개놈의 포원줄 당연도 진민 ninji 대단히 퐁을 샹양 퐁어지 개부 퐁어 대다게 진에 미풍 대다 키스 안다 진지 녀들이 지입니다 전화하다 무지근데 바꿔야지
Verses 61 through to verse 73 or 77 is all misread. And so in verse number 66 it says, if something constantly changes, how could that thing be non-momentary? So in other words, this is refuting the non-Buddhist position, saying that there is something permanent in things, and therefore if it is said that if something is constantly changing, how can it be permanent? And And then so, of course, in the past in India, there were lots of debates and discussions between Buddhist and non-Buddhist proponents. And when we actually look at and read or see the non-Buddhist texts, we can actually find that they are quite profound texts. They're not just easy to refute easily by us. And therefore, there has been lots of debate in Nalanda and other places in India, particularly in Nalanda, because through which when some non-Buddhist positions or assertions are refuted, then the non-Buddhists themselves actually reply in their writings. And then later on, the other Buddhist masters have taken up those positions or rejected those positions through reasoning. And so in this way, there has been lots of challenges posed by Buddhists to the non-Buddhists and non-Buddhists to the Buddhists. And so in this way, both have actually evolved further. And so, as is Holland said, where there are challenges, there is more possibility for further development. And so, because of this, there has been lots of progress that are made, developments that are made in epistemology, logic and epistemology texts of the Buddhists and non-Buddhists as well have benefited. And so Master Nagarjuna and Bhaviveka and so forth have actually given the non-Buddhist positions in their texts, and particularly Bhaviveka in his treatises brings up the different positions of non-Buddhists and then refutes them. And so in this way, what has happened is that 61. I'm sorry, verse number 61 and downwards. So in verse number 62, it says, so verse number 61 says, ask the worldly Sankhya, Visheshikas, the Nirgranthas, who describe person as aggregates, if they ever assert anything beyond existence or non-existence. And thus the eternal teaching of the Buddha that transcends existence and non-existence is said to be profound, that in fact is called the essence of the Dharma. And so this shows the challenges that are posed also by the non-Buddhists to the Buddhists, and then the refutations and discussions have gone on. And so in this way, the Buddhist philosophical traditions also have developed further, epistemology and so forth developed further. And when it comes to the teaching of the Buddha, the emptiness, teaching of the emptiness, then it's said to be profound, and that is in fact said to be the essence of Dharma. And so this is referring to the teaching of emptiness. And then verse number 63 says, destroyed, they neither go nor come, nor remain, nor remain for even a moment more. How can the self and the world that transcend the world, that transcend the three times, truly exist? Now here the analysis of the three times is made, and when we talk about three times, of course there is a past. We can talk about past events and so forth that have happened in the world, and then also we can talk about future, because there is a future, we make plans about for the future as well. And then between these two there is present, and in relation to which we can talk about past and future. But then with regard to the present, we can talk about the present millennium, century, decade, year, month, week, day, hour, minute, second. And when it comes to second, present second, half of the second is gone and half yet to come. And so if you really analyze the second itself, you cannot pinpoint anything as being the second present moment as as such, but it is it is imputed or asserted in relation to the past and future as well. And so if the present were to have any kind of intrinsic independent existence, then of course we should be able to talk about a whole century as a present, and within which we cannot actually divide the century into decades and so forth, if the century were as a whole the present independently, and which is not the case. And even in the case of a day, we can say today is a present day, whereas within this day we can talk about the morning, and which has already passed, and then there is noon, and then there is the afternoon and the evening and so forth. We can divide the day itself into different phases, and so which shows that present itself, even if we may talk about present day, it's not something absolutely existing day as such. And similarly it is the case with century and so forth. And then mainly what we have to actually think about is the mind. And so if the mind were to have any intrinsically, absolutely existing present mind, then we cannot talk about its moments, changes in moments and so forth, whereas we can talk about moments in mind itself, and we can also talk about the present, the manifest clear light and unmanifest, or the clear light ceasing and so forth. And also we can talk about a person passing away and the present person and so forth. And so in this way a present also is must be understood to be designated, not having any kind of absolute existence, intrinsically objective existence at all. And then within that context we can talk about doing practices of Dharma, Tantra, and so through this what we have to understand is the teaching that things have no intrinsic existence, that they are devoid of any independent absolute existence, therefore they are designated. And within that context we have to understand, within the context of understanding emptiness, we need to do tantric practices. When we say everything becomes empty, we have to actually meditate on emptiness. It is a must that if we are doing Buddhist practice of Tantra, the meditation on emptiness is must. Otherwise it will be dangerous if you do with the tantric practices within this ego clinging to some kind of an Atman that the non-Buddhists assert, and still you think that you are doing some Buddhist practice. It could be dangerous to actually intensify and strengthening our self-cherishing attitude, and which is not good. And so if you do that, then your practice of Tantra, even if you may claim you are doing the Buddhist tantric practice, it will be like a Hindu Tantra, doing some kind of Hindu or non-Buddhist tantric practice. And so emptiness is very important. Understanding of emptiness within tantric practice is very crucial. And then verse number 64 says, since both do not truly go, nor come, nor remain, what difference could there actually be between samsara and nirvana? And then it's always read through verse number 65, because there is no abidance. If production and cessation are not true, how could there be ultimately production, abidance, and cessation? So here the three things which are mentioned, production, abidance, and cessation, and then this destruction is called decay and destruction, are asserted by Vaibhashikas, because they very much assert some kind of a concrete existence in the substance of things. They say something which has come through causes and conditions has a phase of arisal, then abidance, and then the decay, and then finally destruction. And so but then, of course, if when you actually look at the arisal and cessation and so forth within the object itself, you cannot find anything that you can actually pinpoint as being arisal and abidance and then decay and destruction as such concretely. And so this is what is rejected. And then verse number 66 says, if something constantly changes, how could that thing be non-momentary? If there are no changes, how could that actually change in something else? else. And so this shows that because things momentarily change, you cannot assert that things have any permanence. And how can they be permanent? And then the last two lines here are refutations of some kind of permanent particle or atom that the non-Buddhists assert. And so when it comes to refuting non-Buddhist positions, for example, in Tibet, there were no non-Buddhists and Hindus and so forth as such. But then, so Gendu Chempel, one of the great masters of the last century, has said that a great translator and great philosopher, and he has said that, of course, it's easy for us to refute the non-Buddhist positions when there is no one around us who actually hold those views. But then if some real non-Buddhists were to come here and debate with us, we would perhaps give in to them. And then similarly, Sekong Rinpoche had said that when we debate about within the context of Madhyamaka debate between Savatantrika, Madhyamaka and Prasangikas, between like in Chandrakirti's Prasanapada, where he refutes the position of Bhava-viveka, and we say that of course Bhava-viveka has said this and that without really understanding the position of Buddha Palita's commentary on Master Nagarjuna's Madhyamaka Karika and so forth. But then if Master Bhava-viveka himself were to come right here in front of us, we perhaps might, conform to his ideas and concepts as well. And so we have to really understand the thrust of these kind of teachings, where we refute the non-Buddhist positions in order to understand our own better. And then His Holiness read through verses 67 through to 77. And says these are showing from verse 67 through to verse number 30 as the 73 first two lines. They show inconsistencies within the positions of non-Buddhists, and then the rest of the verses are also the refutation of non-Buddhist positions.
이제 논파를 하고 있습니다. 그래서 만약에 금리가 항상하는 것이라면 금리로 인해서 발생하는 그러한 결과물들도 변화성을 가질 수 없게 되고, 그렇다면 우리가
So verses 67 I just read if there's some time, because something ceases partially or completely, if it is termed momentary, then as no chances are then seen, both are therefore unreasonable. If momentary, it would not subsist, then how could it ever age? If non-momentary, due to being constant, how then could it ever age? Just as a moment has an end, one must search for its beginning and middle. As moment itself is made of three times.